Chapter 12:15. Yishuan, your idea is not bad. You actually used me to practice your great dragon catching power? Yishuan looked at Yishuan coldly and said, as the saying goes, those closely involved can't see clearly. His reaction was a beat slower, but in any case, being used as a whetstone did not make him feel good. You actually recognize the great dragon catching power? Yishuan was somewhat surprised. Previously, he had also used the great dragon capture power on a whim. However, apart from those big shots of Yi family, the younger generation had almost never recognized the great dragon capture power. So, it was even more difficult for them to recognize it. How can I not know Yi Junshin's famous consummate skill? Yishuan said lightly. I didn't expect to be noticed so soon. It's a pity that my great dragon catching power has not been practiced to the peak. It has not even reached the great accomplishment level. I wanted to use you to push my great dragon catching power to the next level, but unfortunately it was all for naught. Yishuan said with a regretful look on his face, but he was actually very satisfied in his heart. Although Yishuan had noticed it in a short period of time, Yishuan still had a lot of gains. If he were to practice normally, excluding the mysterious space, it might take him a few months to reach this level. If my great dragon catching power reaches the great accomplishment level, defeating you will be a piece of cake. Humph, go ahead and try. Although the capture the dragon power is very famous, but even if you have mastered it, you are still no match for me. That was just a warm-up. Yishuan looked at Yishuan and said with an unusually cold expression. The swordsmanship in Yishuan's hands suddenly burst out with unimaginable light. His body exuded a terrifying fluctuation of qi, as if a terrifying power was boiling in it. He was tall and towering in the void like an ancient demon god. A tyrannical fluctuation swept out from his body in an instant, turning the whole world into a kingdom of swords. Countless sword auras flew, collided with each other, and melted, producing an even more terrifying sword aura. Everyone's expression suddenly changed when they saw this scene. They were all very clear that although law manifestation realm masters could condense their own domain, there were still differences. Everyone's domain range was different, and not everyone's domain range was the same. Some might be 100 meters, while others might be a few hundred meters. Although this battle arena was only a small world that was specifically used for battles, in reality, a small world was still a small world. No matter how small it was, how small could it be? It would at least be a few thousand kilometers. For a transcendence realm, to be able to cover a range of 1,000 kilometers was something that only a peak stage transcendence realm could do. In fact, many peak stage transcendence realms couldn't even do it. Therefore, one could imagine how shocking this domain was to everyone. Even Yishuan couldn't help but become a little dignified when he saw this domain. Judging from the scope of the domain, one could see how terrifying it was. Although the power of the domain was not necessarily related to the size of the domain, on the contrary, the smaller the domain, the stronger the actual control power, and the stronger the power. However, everything didn't have to be looked at in this way. Being able to cover a range of 1,000 kilometers was enough to prove how powerful Yishuan was. In the domain of swordsmanship, Yishuan could almost feel that his body's movements were suddenly controlled. There was no way to move freely at all. Even every wisp of air in this world turned into sword auras to conquer him. In this domain of swordsmanship, Yishuan was the real sword god, and everyone had to obey his orders. What a powerful domain! I didn't expect this Yishuan to cultivate to such a level without anyone noticing. This domain can actually cover the entire battle arena. And this should not be Yishuan's limit, because no one will expand their domain to the extreme when facing an evenly matched opponent. That is equivalent to giving up on suppressing and conquering the opponent. It's really hard to imagine that he is just a kid at the 6th level of law manifestation realm. How can he have such a range of domain? It's really hard to imagine, said a big shot of the Yi family in disbelief. How do we deal with this Yishuan now? Speaking of which, I have never really seen Yishuan's domain. Those people before didn't even have the ability to force his domain out. They are simply trash. These young people nowadays are really more ferocious than the previous one. They are much more ferocious than we were back then. Their future is really boundless. Yishuan couldn't help but sigh. If he didn't unleash his real domain, it would really be difficult to compete with him. Yishuan, I also have to admit that you are the most difficult opponent I have encountered so far. Originally, I didn't even bother to compete with Yi Shui, Yi Feng, and the others. If it weren't for the 9 revolutions Taishian Golden Pill this time, I might not even have appeared. I would have kept quiet. Yi Shukong was just stating the facts lightly. At that time, in front of my swordsmanship domain, everything you have is not worth mentioning at all. Whether it's really not worth mentioning or not, you'll know once you try, Yishuan said with a cold smile. Behind Yishuan, a pair of wings composed entirely of the power of wind and thunder instantly spread out. At the moment when he spread out, the entire sky and earth changed color, filled with the power of wind and thunder. Thunder rumbled, hurricanes attacked, and in an instant, the entire scene changed. The tempest wings behind Yishuan began to flap continuously, and countless power of wind and thunder swept out in an instant. The sword aura that wanted to kill Yishuan was instantly and completely annihilated, unable to get close to Yishuan at all. A domain that only belonged to the power of wind and thunder appeared around Yishuan's body. In this domain, no other elemental laws could survive, only the power of wind and thunder could exist in it. Although the scope of this domain was not very large, only a mere 500 meters, it looked like a small domain that could only be condensed by someone who had just entered the law manifestation realm, let alone be compared to Yi Shukong's swordsmanship domain that shrouded an area of thousands of miles. However, it was already evident from the fact that none of the sword aura could penetrate into Yishuan's domain of wind and thunder. Yi Shukong's domain was large and broad, while Yishuan's domain was small and refined. In the face of Yishuan's domain, Yi Shukong's expression did not change in the slightest. He only mobilized the swordsmanship domain to completely suppress Yishuan. Immediately afterward, countless sword aura condensed frantically above his head. In a short while, it had condensed into a huge magic sword, blooming with a terrifying light. The light on the blade seemed to be able to tear the sky. This magic sword seemed to be able to completely cut the entire sky. Yishuan's expression suddenly changed. He had already understood Yi Shukong's intention. The battle of domains was just a facade. Yi Shukong did not even think of defeating Yishuan with his domain. Yishuan wanted to use his domain to completely restrain Yishuan and pave the way for his later sword. After figuring this out, Yishuan did not dare to be complacent anymore. No matter how much he knew in his heart, Yi Shukong's sword was definitely able to severely injure a master at the 7th heaven of the law manifestation realm, and sweep away all warriors at the 6th heaven of the law manifestation realm. However, the bad thing was that in this swordsmanship domain, almost all the laws were under his control. Yishuan could not dodge at all in this narrow space. Therefore, Yi Shukong clearly knew that it was simply a waste to open such a large domain. He should not have done so, but in fact, he still opened it to keep an eye on Yishuan. Otherwise, Yishuan would not be able to escape from this sword. He actually wants to decide the outcome of this battle with one sword. Such ambition, such determination, Yishuan said with his eyes narrowed. However, at this time, it was already too late to dodge. No matter how fast Yishuan was, as long as he could not break the space of this small world, he would not be faster than Yi Shukong's sword aura. He could not dodge at all and could only face it head-on. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the sword light suddenly fell and slashed towards Yishuan. It's too late! Many of the big shots of the Yi family could see that Yi Shukong wanted to decide the outcome of this battle with one sword. He had to first lock Yishuan in place so that he would have time to cast the technique calmly. Just now was the only time that Yishuan could stop him. Unfortunately, Yishuan could not stop him. Now, it was simply too late. Although Yishuan had opened up his domain, he could not break Yi Shukong's domain. He could only move within Yi Shukong's domain. Although he was protected by the domain and his movements were not restricted, similarly, as long as he was still within Yi Shukong's domain, This sword was simply unavoidable. They could not help but change their expressions because they realized that if they wanted to avoid this sword, there was no way at all. They could not even escape. More importantly, it was simply too late to face the enemy. And at this time, Yi Shiwen spread out his palm, and countless Jinyuan mixed with countless Lingqi, and the power of wind and thunder began to condense in his palm. No matter what kind of energy it was, it crazily gathered in his palm, and even those sword ki were absorbed in an instant. And the sword aura was getting brighter and brighter. The sword aura shone on Yi Shiwen's face, making his face look even more indifferent, as if he did not feel that the sword aura was about to hit his body at all. And just when the sword aura was about to hit Yi Shiwen's body and kill him, he opened his mouth and shouted, "Yuan Qi bullet!" A spherical Yuan Qi bullet in his hand spun wildly, and then was instantly thrown out by Yi Shiwen to meet the sword aura. Chapter 12:16. Yuan Qi bullet! The ball-shaped Yuan Qi ball in his hand rotated crazily, and then he instantly threw it out to meet the incoming sword light. Boom! The Yuan Qi bullet and the shocking sword light collided fiercely. Boom! Boom! The dazzling light produced by the explosion instantly covered the entire sky. The sword light and the crazy explosion of the Yuan Qi bullets strangled each other. The space in the entire microcosm began to distort, making it difficult for everyone to see what was going on inside. Only the big shots of the Yi family who saw this scene were shocked and shouted, "How could this be?" After a long time, the smoke and dust dissipated. Everyone only saw that the arena was on the verge of collapsing. All the mountains and rivers had been completely destroyed and turned into a desert. And at this moment, they saw two figures facing each other in midair, both panting heavily. Yi Shiwen, who originally thought that he might have died under Yi Shukong's sword, was still standing intact in the void. There was not a trace of injury on him, but he was constantly panting heavily. On the other side, Yi Shukong was also constantly panting heavily. The sword attack just now had consumed too much of his Jinyuan. In addition, in order to prevent Yi Shiwen from escaping, he frantically opened up the domain and enveloped the entire microcosm. Even though he was known as invincible and had far more Jinyuan than ordinary people, he still felt a huge and terrifying consumption. His eyes never left Yi Shiwen. He used all his strength in the attack, but he did not expect that it would not be able to kill Yi Shiwen. He did not even manage to injure Yi Shiwen. This was also something he had never expected. He was very clear about the power of that sword attack. Even if he took it head-on, there would only be a dead end. It was impossible for him to survive. But he did not expect that Yi Shiwen would actually take it head-on and come out unscathed. What was that move called? He looked at Yi Shiwen doubtfully. Yuan Qi bullet. It was such a strange name, yet it possessed such astonishing might. Even his fatal blow was unable to injure him severely. On the other side, Yi Shiwen was also constantly panting. Although the quantity of his real yuan was far more than ordinary people and should be more profound than Yi Shukong's, he was caught off guard by Yi Shukong just now and had no time to prepare any other moves. If he were to fight head-on, even if he had the tyrant body, he would not be able to escape the fate of being seriously injured. That was why Yi Shiwen had chosen the Yuan Qi ball. As long as he mobilized the Jinyuan, he could instantly cast this big move. Although the consumption of the Yuan Qi ball was enormous, but he could still afford to consume about 1/10 of the Jinyuan. But the real problem was that he simply did not have enough time. The Essence Qi Bullet's model was to use a bit of essence energy as a primer to wrap up countless external energies, fuse them together, and then shoot them out. This was the Essence Qi Bullet. However, due to the lack of time, he didn't have enough time to absorb enough external energy to form the Essence Qi Bomb. At this time, he could only choose to increase the amount of quintessential essence input. This one breath consumed more than half of his quintessential essence, making him feel like all the quintessential essence in his body was drained. This feeling, he had not felt this way for a long time. Have to say, he rarely fought in such a situation. Countless fallen leaves swirled in the air, and the gravel, under the inexplicable force, flew up from the ground and flew into the sky. One after another, they shattered. Just this move alone had consumed too much of the Jingyuan in his body in one breath. Yishuan, I didn't expect you to be able to dodge this move, Yishukong said while panting heavily. There are still a lot of things that you didn't expect. Yishuan grinned and said. He suddenly stomped his feet and his figure suddenly rushed towards Yishukong. Almost in an instant, he pounced in front of Yishuan. After unfolding the devil's wings, Yishuan's speed did not slow down at all. In an instant, he surpassed the limits of his physical body. So fast! How can he be so fast? At this time, many of the big shots in the depths of the cloud platform suddenly changed their expressions. Originally, the battle between the two, whether it was a battle of martial arts or a battle of moves, was still within the scope of their expectations. It was like a battle between two children, there was no need to care at all. But Yishuan's current speed, even these celestial realm masters, after seeing it, still felt extremely amazed. Even these sky human stage experts were shocked, let alone the rest of them. Bang! With a loud noise, Yishuan's fist fiercely hit Yishukong's chest. Boom! A loud explosion came, and then his figure was directly punched out like a cannonball, directly dragging a huge mark on the ground. His body directly dragged a crack on the ground that was tens of miles long, directly setting off countless smoke and dust. Only then did he stop. Everyone looked at Yishuan in a daze. Green leaves fell, constantly flying and stirring in Yishuan's momentum, and there was a burst of mournful wind in his ears. Is this his true strength? Someone exclaimed. Seeing this scene, he was simply dumbfounded. They could almost only see Yishuan disappear, and then reappear, and then Yishukong was blasted out like a cannonball. Compared to just now, the current Yishuan seemed more terrifying and daunting. If his strength just now seemed to be within the scope of everyone's understanding, then a pair of demon wings was equivalent to a tiger that had grown wings, and there was a fundamental improvement. Is Yishukong going to die? At this time, everyone had just stopped marveling at Yishuan and turned to Yishukong. A terrifying power, in the direction of Yishukong, instantly boiled up. Countless terrifying cyclones, mixed with gravel and all kinds of debris, rose into the air. Yishuan, you are the first to be able to force me to this extent! A cold, ruthless voice came from the smoke and dust. Everyone fixed their eyes and saw a figure crawling out of the ruins. His figure was also imposing, and an inexplicable aura was exuding from his body. It was a kind of majestic aura that overlooked all living beings. In the depths of the cloud platform, some of the old antiques of the Yi family and other forces had a drastic change in expression. This was the aura of a legendary deity. Yishuan, do you know why I was able to reach this point without the Yi family's nurturing? Yishukong seemed to have recognized Yishuan's strength and status, and was actually in the mood to chat with him. There was a cloud of smoke and dust, and Yishuan could not see Yishukong's face clearly. He could only vaguely see a figure standing in it. His body exuded a kind of aura that Yishuan felt was unusually familiar. Yes, it was a familiar aura. The aura of a deity. Yishuan quickly realized that this aura was the aura of a deity. He had once slaughtered many descendants of demon gods on the demon island, so the divinity he had refined was still very important to him. Therefore, he would never forget this aura. Although it was a completely different deity, it must be said that the feeling of indifference, and the feeling of treating all living beings as ants was exactly the same. It was just that in comparison, this deity's aura was purer than the descendants of demon gods that Yishuan had slaughtered. Because I am the son of God! Yishukong's face could not be seen in the cloud of smoke and dust, but his cold voice could be heard. The son of God! Suddenly, everyone was stunned. It was hard to imagine that there would be such a reason. Everyone was boiling with excitement. Whether it was the Yi family or the forces of other clans, when they heard this news, they were completely boiling with excitement. Even the big shots in the depths of the cloud platform were the same, not because of anything else, but because of the Son of God. Since a long time ago, after the end of the mythological era ruled by the deities, after the twilight of the gods, the deities had already changed from a real existence to a legendary existence. Everything about the deities had been eliminated in the long river of history, little by little. In people's impression, those deities were arrogant, mysterious, cold, and they were the masters of everything in the world. Therefore, everything about the deities had become the focus of everyone's pursuit, and the most important thing was that they were immortal. Not only the human race, but also the real goal of other clans. After cultivating to the sky human realm, in reality, there was only one step left to reach this step. Just one more step and they would be able to step into the realm of immortality. However, since the end of the mythological era, no one had been able to enter the realm of immortality, only one step away from entering the realm of immortality. Therefore, they were so keen to understand everything about the deities, and wanted to unravel the mystery of the deities' immortality. However, the disappearance of the mythological era was too sudden, and there were not many things left behind, often becoming the collection of various behemoths. But now, a Son of God had actually appeared in front of them. If it was the Son of God, then everything could be explained, because the deities were the masters of the heavens and the realms, and the sons of God were the children of heaven who were favored by the heavens. They were born with the blood of the deities, and there were no obstacles in their cultivation at all. Even if they did not cultivate at all, because of the continuous awakening of the blood of the deities in their bodies, their cultivation would naturally rise at a crazy rate. They were born strong, and there were many legends about the sons of God in ancient times, but that was a long, long time ago. Chapter 12:17. In fact, there were many people in this world who possessed the bloodline of the gods. For example, the second god, whom Yishuan had killed previously, possessed the bloodline of the legendary Titan clan. The Titan clan, even in the mythological era, was also a powerful clan of gods. But even so, he could not be regarded as the son of God. At most, he could only be regarded as having stimulated some of the bloodline of the Titan clan. He was far from being regarded as the son of God. In addition to the first generation of the gods, their descendants could only be regarded as the Son of God if they stimulated the concentration of the god's bloodline to more than 50%. Do not underestimate this 50%. In the records of the ancient books, except for the descendants of the gods and mortals who were naturally the Son of God, it was extremely difficult for other descendants to stimulate more than 50% of the bloodline. For many people, it was simply impossible. Of course, there were also some descendants who were born with genetic mutations and could possess more than 50% of the bloodline, such as Yishukong in front of him. Presumably, Yishukong originally did not want to expose that he was the Son of God, because once exposed, there would be many people eyeing him covetously. After all, no one had been able to touch the legendary immortal realm of the gods for many years. Now that a Son of God had suddenly appeared, how attractive would it be to those old guys who were about to die of old age? Yishuan could imagine how terrifying that scene would be. If he was not born in the Yi family, if he was born in a small force, perhaps this small force would be completely destroyed on the spot. Then Yishukon would also be captured and used as a guinea pig to explore the source of the god's majesty. In the countless years after the end of the mythological era, people had long lost any fear of the gods. There was even a saying that the reason why the mythological era ended was because the fear of the mortals towards the gods had disappeared. But now, Yishukong had been forced into a corner by Yishuan, or rather, he was really angry. He would not hesitate to expose his identity as the Son of God in order to defeat Yishuan. At this time, everyone was no longer surprised. The Son of God, if he was the Son of God, then there was nothing to be surprised about. The Son of God was born to be strong. There would be no obstacles in their cultivation, and they could cultivate all the way to the peak of the celestial being realm without the Yi family noticing. In the future, with the help of the Yi family, he could almost be described as a meteoric rise. It would not take long for him to enter the celestial being realm. The future was simply limitless. In this case, Yishuan was almost finished. Only a god's son could contend against a god's son. Even a heaven's pride expert wouldn't be able to do so. After all, they were the favored children of the heavens. So, they possessed advantages that ordinary people couldn't imagine. It's a pity. If you hadn't met me, your championship would have been in the bag. Yishukon's figure became more and more blurred. He became more mysterious, noble, and cold. Although his realm did not continue to increase, his aura was constantly growing stronger, surging and bursting out. He looked even more tyrannical than Yishuwen. He no longer suppressed the aura of his body, and completely released it all at once. Although countless people might spy on him, he didn't care about this at this time. He had unleashed his true fire, and if he couldn't defeat Yishuwen, it might even give birth to a heart demon. He was the Son of God. Although he was not the real Son of God, he was the favorite of the heavens. Some geniuses were called the Son of God and were called the Son of God. That was because they flattered themselves and called themselves the Son of God. Only they, the Son of God, were the true favorites of the heavens and were blessed by the heavens. Since the accidental awakening of his bloodline, everything had been smooth sailing for him. In the past, cultivation was a very difficult thing for him. However, since the awakening of his bloodline, cultivation became as easy as eating and drinking. He could instantly understand any profound power technique that was difficult to understand. It was as if he had the help of the god. This was the power of the Son of God. Therefore, although he was very low-key in the Yi family and nobody knew about him, in fact, no one in the younger generation was worthy of his attention. Even those who were called the Son of God were nothing in his eyes. The only thing he lacked was time. As long as he had enough time, he would definitely become a great figure that could shock the ancients and dazzle the contemporaries. However, he suffered a big loss in front of Yishuwen. He didn't gain any advantage in front of Yishuwen. It could even be said that he was constantly at a disadvantage. No matter what kind of trial he used, he couldn't completely suppress Yishuwen. This had never happened since the awakening of his bloodline. Therefore, he had become really angry and didn't hesitate to expose his identity as the Son of God. As for the fact that countless people would be spying on him at that time, and countless external forces would be itching to get rid of him. However, this was also a problem that the higher-ups of the Yi family would worry about after the competition. The imposing aura on his body was rising crazily. However, it had integrated with his body and seemed to be a natural entity. In the depths of Yishuwen's body, the sleeping Niemo was once again awakened by this aura. This is the aura of the gods. No, the opposite side is a Son of God. Niemo quickly made a judgment. In this era where the gods don't exist, someone can actually awaken his bloodline and become the Son of God. This in itself is a very miraculous thing. Yishuwen was shocked. Niemo was in the midst of evolution. It was impossible for ordinary things to wake him up from his deep sleep. Previously it was because of the arrival of the Yi family's patriarch, and now it was because of Yishukon's aura. One could imagine that for Niemo, the appearance of the Son of God was also a very shocking thing. The mythological era had ended many years ago. The Son of God that appeared would naturally not be the real Son of God. However, for those who could awaken more than 50% of their bloodline, there was no difference. Facing a Son of God, how could Yishuwen not have a headache? If Yishukon was the favorite of the gods, then Yishuwen felt that he probably had some kind of grudge against the gods. Otherwise, why would he feel that the gods were beating him to death every time he crossed the heavenly tribulation? There was no feeling of leniency at all. Not to mention when compared to the Son of God, who claimed to have no obstacles in his cultivation, it was not at the same level at all. But even so, he was determined to get the 9 revolutions Taishian golden pill. Yishukon did not necessarily have to get the 9 revolutions Taishian golden pill because he was the Son of God. Even without any external help, advancing into the celestial realm was as easy as eating and drinking. But it was different for him. Every time he crossed the heavenly tribulation, he felt like he was beaten to death. With the 9 revolutions Taishian golden pill, he was much more confident. There's no other way, Yishukon. The 9 revolutions Taishian golden pill is mine. Even if you're the Son of God, You can't stop me from moving forward today. Yishuwen laughed. Indeed, you're very special, but I'm even more special than you. As Yishuwen spoke, countless spiritual energies began to sweep wildly from his body, forming a huge spiritual energy shield around his body. The appearance of this shield was actually a legendary star colossus lying in the starry sky, choosing its prey to devour. The aura on Yishuwen's body also rose crazily little by little, and a terrifying spiritual energy swept wildly. A large area of smoke and dust was swept into a storm, sweeping outwards. What an amazing spiritual energy! At this time, countless spectators in the audience seats looked at Yishuwen, who was gradually merging into the giant beast, in astonishment. The true essence emitted from his body actually shocked them. Even if it was just spiritual chi, it was already stirring up the world and causing it to change color. What is that giant beast phantom? Does anyone recognize it? Someone asked hurriedly at this time. Is this the legendary star colossus that is recorded in the ancient books, the one that feeds on the star world? In the mythological era, this kind of fierce beast used to be infamous, known as a terrifying giant beast that could challenge the dragon clan. An old antique stared for a long time, and finally recognized the identity of the huge fierce beast around Yishuwen. The Yi family had been passed down for many years. For many people, it might be a very rare question, but in the Yi family, there were records of it. Star Colossus. Those big shots had a slight change in expression. It was another extremely fierce bloodline. The Star Colossus was known to be able to challenge and kill the Dragon Clan, and the Dragon Clan was known to be a race that could challenge the gods. It was conceivable how tyrannical this Star Colossus was. Although they had not actually seen the Star Colossus, they could already get a glimpse of it from the handwritten records of the predecessors. Because of Yishuwen, Yishukon constantly broke through his bottom line and constantly exposed his trump cards. Wasn't Yishuwen the same? First, it was the Spirit Bomb, then the Demon Wings, and then the Star Colossus. Although he did not dare to transform into the real body of the Star Colossus now, he did not want to be like Yishukon and become a lab rat for others to dissect and study. However, there was no problem in condensing a fake body with endless spiritual energy. As the spiritual energy on Yishuwen's body became more and more intense, the face of the Star Colossus also began to gradually become clear, becoming more and more ferocious. And Yishuwen's figure also began to gradually disappear into the body of the Star Colossus composed of spiritual energy. It was like a wild beast had been resurrected all of a sudden. The terrifying spiritual energy stirred up a gust of wind, directly blowing away the smoke and dust in front of Yishukon, blowing his clothes and making a whistling sound. The astral wind blew on his face, causing a dull pain. His eyes became colder and colder. Chapter 12:18. Yishukon's body exuded a divine aura, just like a god in the world. Looking at him made people feel an urge to kneel down. Noble, mysterious, cold. On the other side, Yishuwen's body exuded an extremely violent aura, just like a ferocious beast with a terrifying aura. Two terrifying auras collided fiercely on the spot. One was noble, and the other was violent. It seemed that the two forces were incompatible at all, and they collided fiercely. Yishukon looked coldly at Yishuwen, whose aura had changed drastically. He was like a ferocious beast, just like a god who encountered those terrifying ferocious beasts in the ancient times. His body carried an indescribable sense of nobility and coldness. "Sword, come!" Yishukon shouted loudly. In his hand, a sword condensed from spiritual energy suddenly appeared in his hand. This was not an ordinary sword aura. This sick sword was entwined with countless laws, and it had a chilling aura. "Mortal sword breaks!" The sword in his hand outlined a dreamy trace, mixed with the understanding of the Great Way. Ordinary people could not look directly at the light. Seeing Yishukon in this state, many masters at the seventh heaven of the law manifestation realm also had a slight change of expression at this time. Because they found that if they were in Yishukon's shoes, they might be severely injured in an instant. If they were not careful, there was even a possibility of being killed. Although they also knew that it was impossible to maintain this peak combat state of the two for a long time, it was enough to severely injure them without maintaining this peak state for a long time. That sword light turned into a sky-covering sword aura in the void and rushed towards Yishiwen. Those sword lights simply turned into an endless light curtain of swordsmanship in the air, completely crushing towards Yishiwen. On the other side, Yishiwen did not move at all. He was completely integrated into the star beast, as if he was originally a star beast. And just when the light curtain was about to crush Yishiwen's body, Yishiwen finally moved. His huge beast claw suddenly swung up and slammed fiercely on the ground. Boom! A huge explosion swept across the sky and rose up into the sky. In an instant, countless energy waves swept out in a frenzy and spread outwards. When the sword lights came into contact with the frenzied energy tide that was spreading outwards, they were instantly annihilated into light pillars. Endless airwaves swept out, directly flattening a large pit within a radius of more than 10 miles. It's just a casual wave of his hand, yet it possesses such terrifying power. Countless experts in the audience were dumbfounded when they saw this scene. They did not expect Yishiwen to have such power with just a wave of his hand. Both Yishiwen and Yi Shukong's strength seemed to be far beyond their imagination. After the two of them displayed their full strength, they were so valiant that it made people tremble in fear. The smoke and dust gradually dispersed, revealing only the huge body of Yishiwen. He was motionless and completely unscathed. Not a single one of those sword lights was able to hit his body. This kind of terrifying power made everyone feel somewhat terrified. Even Yi Shukong narrowed his eyes. He did not expect that after Yishiwen's transformation, he would be so terrifying. It was not just a shell of spiritual energy. However, he didn't know that the outer shell of spiritual energy on Yishiwen's body was just a cover. It covered the Star Beast deity under the outer shell of his spiritual tool. After the Star Beast's bloodline was stimulated, he became this terrifying appearance. Otherwise, it would be impossible to have such a terrifying power. It was just a shell of Star Beast, and it only resembled the form, but not the spirit. At this time, Yishiwen finally moved. He was going to launch a counterattack. He could feel that not only the terrifying consumption of maintaining this kind of star beast, but also because there were countless crazy and brutal thoughts swarming in an instant. They actually wanted to occupy the highest part of his brain. Although the Mingxin ancient tree emitted bursts of colorful light, blocking these brutal thoughts outside the sea of consciousness, this was not a long-term solution. The spirit bomb just now had already consumed half of his qi in one breath. Now he had transformed into the star beast mode that consumed qi. There was no way to fight for a long time. The only way was to end the battle quickly. It's really a terrifying confrontation. It turns out that Yi Shukong has reached such a realm. The Son of God. He has been hiding his strength and identity, but now he is forced out by Yishiwen. I'm afraid Yishiwen is going to be unlucky. This Yishiwen cannot be underestimated. I thought that this star beast was just a shell just now. I didn't expect it to be able to erupt with such terrifying power. When its claws fell, it actually erupted with such a terrifying explosion. But no matter how tyrannical Yishiwen is, it is impossible for him to be Yi Shukong's opponent. The Son of God, only the Son of God can fight against the Son of God. Even the prodigy, even if Yishiwen is an evildoer, it is impossible. First, there is such an evildoer Yishiwen. Now, the Son of God is born in our Yi family. Is the heavens really going to bring prosperity to our Yi family? This is really great. After Yishiwen had made up his mind, he took the lead to launch an attack. His claws suddenly slammed forward, and then everyone only heard a boom sound. The entire ground in front of him completely collapsed. Boom! There was another terrifying loud noise, and then, along the direction of the collapse, another part of the ground completely collapsed. Boom! 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 The entire ground was like a domino, shattering inch by inch. Then, it was instantly blasted into the sky by a terrifying force. All of this took a long time to describe, but in fact, it was just an instant. The shattered part had instantly spread from the ground to the sky. The endless air also collapsed in an instant, and the space was completely distorted. The terrifying force instantly blasted in front of Yishukong. Yishukong did not hesitate. He directly tapped his toes, and his figure instantly swept backward frantically. However, the terrifying force did not show any signs of stopping. It even turned and directly chased after Yishukong. This made Yishukong a little surprised. This force was actually controlled by Yishuwen in the distance, and it could even track him. At this time, he did not continue to escape. Instead, he spread his palm, and a sword was formed in the air. The sword light formed a huge sword curtain in midair, completely wrapping him in it. Boom! The energy directly hit Yishukong's body. The collision of the two terrifying forces directly set off a terrifying energy frenzy. In this terrifying collision, Yishukong was forced to take a few steps back to cushion the terrifying impact brought by this force. However, the air under his feet had been completely crushed, and there was not a trace left, forming a huge vacuum. Whoosh! And just when everyone had not fully reacted, the huge figure on Yishuwen's body had instantly rushed in front of Yishukong, and the huge claws suddenly pierced towards Yishukong fiercely. His claws were imbued with the power of wind and thunder, allowing his claws to instantly penetrate the void at an unimaginable speed. In an instant, it pierced through the void, and instantly pierced into Yishukong's chest as if it had pierced through the void. Yishukong's reaction was not slow either. Although he was a little slower than Yishuwen, he still reacted in an instant. He directly slashed out a huge sword lotus in his hand, and slashed towards the huge claws. Boom! The sword lotus and the huge claws collided fiercely. Yishuwen's huge figure was forced to take a few steps back. Yishukong was even more unbearable. He directly retreated hundreds of meters before he could offset Yishuwen's terrifying force. The power of Yishuwen's tyrant body was already very terrifying, but after transforming back into the Star Beast avatar, Yishuwen's power was equivalent to the tyrant body plus the Star Beast avatar. One could imagine how terrifying it would become. Even Yishukong, the son of God, could not do anything to his strange power. It could be seen how terrifying it was. I am the Supreme Sword Principle. I am the Supreme God. After Yishukong's figure stopped, he finally kept chanting. The sword light in his hand continued to slash out, each more terrifying than the previous one. However, these sword moves did not attack Yishuwen. Instead, they constantly condensed on top of his head. Every time he slashed out a sword light, the sword light above his head became more tyrannical and terrifying. As the sword light condensed and accumulated, it seemed to become more and more terrifying. Yishuwen suddenly felt the terror of this sword. The sword Dao domain around him began to show faint signs of boiling. It was getting sharper and sharper. Inch by inch, the domain of the power of wind and thunder around him was smashed. This slow change looked abnormally terrifying. He was accumulating a terrifying attack. At this time, Yishuwen had already moved. He burst out with a terrifying speed that was completely different from his huge speed. He directly rushed towards Yishukong frantically. He could not let Yishukong's sword completely condense. But at this time, Yishukong's attack seemed to be completed. A terrifying sword light was launched in an instant. It traversed the vast sky in an instant, and turned into a terrifying torrent of energy. It slashed down towards Yishuwen, who was flying over. Boom! Yishuwen did not have time to dodge. The terrifying torrent of energy turned into an energy sword light and slashed on his body. It directly pierced through him and nailed him to the ground. Chapter 12:19. Boom! Yishuwen didn't have enough time to dodge. That terrifying torrent of energy transformed into an energy light sword and fiercely chopped his body. It directly pierced through him and severely nailed him to the ground. Yishuwen's huge body slammed into the ground, and with the terrifying power of the sword light, he was nailed to the ground on the spot. This is too terrifying. This Yishuwen is also a monster. I don't know what kind of adventure he had to have to be so terrifying. His physique should not be ordinary either, but it's also possible that he has a special bloodline physique, someone said. In the Yi clan, there were many people with special constitutions. Some of them were because their ancestors had intermarried with other clans, leaving behind a different bloodline. Some of them had even awakened the bloodline of ancient humans and became incomparably terrifying. There were indeed not many people with such a special bloodline, but with so many people in the Yi clan, the probability was much higher. Indeed, I think so too. It's a pity. He should have been invincible, but he met a god's child that only appears once in 1,000 years. It's a pity that he met a god's child. It's his misfortune. Not only him, even the others are the same. Being born in the same generation as the god's child is in itself a tragedy for those geniuses. Their brilliance will all be annihilated by the god's child. Compared to the god's child, those geniuses and monsters are all fleeting clouds. They are not worthy to be mentioned in the same breath as the god's child. So, his good luck ends here. I don't know what kind of adventure Yishiwen had to be so terrifying, but it's time to end it. At this time, in the depths of the cloud platform, when the representatives of the other forces saw these two people, their expressions suddenly changed. Whether it was the abnormal monster Yishiwen or the god's child Yishukong, it was enough to make their expressions change. For the Yi clan to have such a genius, it was also a huge threat to them, especially the god's child, Yishukong. As old monsters who had lived for God knows how many years, they knew very well what kind of creature the god's child was. They were not ordinary beings since they were born, and cultivation was as simple as eating and drinking. As long as they did not die prematurely, cultivating to the peak of the celestial realm was not a problem at all, and even among the peak of the celestial realm, they were extremely strong. Such a character would be a huge threat to any faction if he were to oversee it. If it was one of their own forces, they would naturally want as many of them as possible. But if it wasn't, they would naturally want as few as possible. Especially the foreign experts, their eyes were flickering, as if they were thinking about how to get rid of these two people. Especially Yishukong, the Son of God, what an awe-inspiring name. If they couldn't kill him now, he would become a huge problem for them in the future. Many of the big shots of the Yi clan were also having a headache at this time. They did not expect the situation to turn out like this. They did not expect Yishukong to be the Son of God. Otherwise, they would not have given him the chance to reveal his identity as the Son of God. They would have secretly taken him away and trained him. Now that they were exposed in public, it would be even more difficult to protect them. Yishiwen has been nailed to the ground. It seems that the outcome of this battle has been decided. Sure enough, only the Son of God can defeat the Son of God. Although Yishiwen is also a monster, after all, he is still several levels below. Second brother. Yi Qiao and the others looked at Yishiwen worriedly. At this time, when they saw Yishiwen being nailed to the ground, they suddenly panicked. They had never seen Yishiwen being nailed to the ground. Even when he faced Yixing, he was easily defeated by Yishiwen. They were not opponents of the same level at all. Only in the face of Yishukong did Yishiwen reveal this embarrassing side of him. Son of God, no matter how ignorant they were, they knew how much weight these three words carried. Only the Son of God could fight against the Son of God. Although everyone believed that Yishiwen was going to be defeated, Yishukong, who was in midair, did not relax at all. He was constantly operating his martial arts to restore the consumed qi in his body. Because Yishiwen had not been taken away by the white light, it showed that he had not completely lost his combat power at this time. However, he did not take the opportunity to launch an attack. The sword just now had consumed 70 to 80% of his qi. Even if he launched an attack, it would not be powerful. However, Yishiwen was crazily operating the observing person scripture at a place where they couldn't see. The power of countless stars had wrapped up the light sword that had pierced through his huge body. Therefore, he hadn't been nailed to death by the sword. However, he didn't immediately pull out the lightsaber. Instead, he chose to wrap the entire lightsaber up. Although he did not want to say it, he had to admit that the Son of God was indeed the Son of God. This sword was not just an ordinary sword attack, it even contained many divine way laws, causing the power of this sword to explode to a terrifying extent. Even his tyrant body and star beast bloodline body was nailed to the ground on the spot. If an outsider were to see what Yishiwen was doing, they would probably be scared stiff because Yishiwen was refining these sword lights. He was stripping out the divine way principles from these sword lights. These principles could only be comprehended by gods. Only the sons of gods could instinctively use these principles that belonged to the divine way. The divine way laws had exceeded the level that mortals could understand. Even the Son of God could not understand them at all. They could use them, but they could not understand the principles behind them. It was like a person who could shoot a gun, but he did not necessarily know how to design a gun, or even make a gun. But Yishiwen was different. He had the mysterious space. He could even analyze and understand these divine way laws, absorb and refine them. Of course, a part of his spirit crystal would be crazily burned every time he absorbed and refined a portion of this God's Tao law. However, his realm was also crazily improving. Even if he could only touch the edge of the God's Tao law, it would still be an unimaginable benefit for his realm. In addition to being analyzed and understood by him, these divine way laws were also refined into divinity. Only divinity could accommodate these divine way laws. For others, this sword was equivalent to severely injuring them. The sword aura that contained the divine way laws could destroy the muscles in their body crazily. They would soon be tortured to death. But for him, this was not the case. For him, there was Phoenix regeneration technique constantly healing him. These sword auras could not worsen his injuries at all. Therefore, it caused such a scene. Although he was severely injured, he was not taken away by the white light. To him, it was like someone was constantly explaining some things about the divine way to him, making him feel like his horizons had been broadened. That was why he wasn't in a hurry to retaliate, and he was constantly absorbing and refining the light sword instead. Fortunately, Yishiwen was also recovering his Jinyuan. Coupled with the fear in his heart, he didn't dare to rashly launch an attack. This gave Yishiwen enough time to calmly absorb the light swords on his body, including some of the sword principles and divine principles. After a while, the whole scene was still in a stalemate. Just when everyone thought that the stalemate would continue, someone suddenly realized that the light sword on Yishiwen's body had disappeared. That light sword, it actually disappeared. Indeed. How could it possibly vanish? That's indeed a sword of light. But in reality it's formed from the sword Tao laws and divine Tao laws. It's utterly impossible for it to vanish with the wind after the attack. Yishiwen finally realized this, but his expression was still very calm because he had taken advantage of this time to recover to his peak. Even if Yishiwen took the opportunity to attack, he was not afraid at all. And at this moment, Yishiwen's pair of huge lantern-like eyes suddenly opened, bursting with a terrifying gaze. The aura on his body continued to rise, and very soon, it had recovered to its peak as if the situation of the sword just now seriously injuring him did not exist at all. The wound that was originally cut by the light sword also recovered bit by bit under his gaze. In a short while, it was as if the previous serious injury did not exist at all. But what surprised countless people even more was that Yishiwen's aura had not yet risen to its peak. What shocked them was that Yishiwen's aura was actually still rising, and it was much more tyrannical than when it was at its peak just now. If Yishiwen had only just reached the third heaven of the Transcendence Realm before, then he had now reached the peak of the third heaven of the Transcendence Realm. In those 3 months, Yishiwen only focused on breaking through, but before he had time to deduce his cultivation to the peak of the third heaven of the Transcendence Realm, the competition began. Time did not allow him to continue cultivating at all. Fortunately, the opponent was not considered strong. Even if he did not push his cultivation to the peak of the third heaven of the Transcendence Realm, it was enough to deal with him. It was just that when facing the Son of God, Yishiwen, he suffered a great loss. Now, in a short period of time, just refining the divine way laws on this light sword actually made his cultivation soar to the peak of the third heaven of the Transcendence Realm. As long as he calmed down, it was probably only a matter of time before he entered the fourth heaven of the Transcendence realm. The profoundness and mystery of the divine way laws could be seen. After all, this was a law that only gods could comprehend. Yishuan opened his bloody mouth and roared in a low voice. I'm taking the 9 revolutions Taishian golden pill. Son of God or whatever, lose! Chapter 12:20. At this moment, everyone felt that the entire world had changed color along with Yishuan's words. His roaring words instantly spread throughout the entire world of the arena. Yishukon's expression also changed slightly. He could not imagine how Yishuan was not severely injured by his sword strike. On the contrary, his cultivation actually skyrocketed from the 3rd sky of the Transcendence realm to the peak of the 3rd sky of the Transcendence realm. Even some of the aura on Yishuan's body made him feel a little familiar. That familiar aura could only be felt on his body before, but now, he could actually feel it on Yishuan's body. A tyrannical aura erupted from Yishuan's body. The surging aura intertwined into a pillar of aura and shot straight into the sky. I don't care what changes you have. Today's battle should end, Yishukon shouted coldly. As the Son of God, it was simply a shame for him to not be able to take down Yishuan after such a long time. Even so, he had to admit that Yishuan was indeed a monster. But no matter what kind of monster or genius, in front of his Son of God, they were all fleeting clouds, a laughable joke. I am the Supreme God! With a loud shout, the countless sword auras around him began to condense into a magic sword. The magic sword burst with unimaginable light, and his entire body entered the state of being one with the sword. Immediately afterward, the huge magic sword blasted towards Yishuan at lightning speed, wanting to repeat the scene of Yishuan being nailed to the ground previously. But compared to the Yishuan just now, the current Yishuan was like heaven and earth. He did not move at all. He just opened his bloody mouth, and countless waves of real yuan frantically condensed in his mouth. Countless spiritual auras were immediately absorbed by the real yuan in his mouth. The surrounding space trembled crazily. The boundless spiritual ether instantly turned into a terrifying sword that took shape in the air. It was actually somewhat similar to the sword that Yishukon had slashed out, but there was also a definite difference. Anyone could tell at a glance that it was a different sword. Swoosh! Yishuan's final huge magic sword instantly blasted out, turning into a torrent of energy, and then blasted in the direction of Yishukon. Boom! The 2 huge magic swords collided fiercely in the air. It was too terrifying. Endless rays of light covered the entire sky. Endless white light completely covered the entire horizon. A terrifying mushroom cloud slowly rose with a loud bang, setting off a terrible airwave that directly flattened all the uneven objects into a huge pit. 2 terrifying forces collided in the void, and countless dust clouds obscured everyone's vision. After a long time, the dust clouds finally dissipated. At this moment, everyone finally saw the situation in the arena clearly. In front of Yishuan's huge body, a huge crack appeared in front of him and spread into the void. The 2 magical swords fought crazily. This was a battle of wills between the 2, and it was not over yet. The 2 magical swords represented 2 completely different sword das. Boom! All of a sudden, the terrifying power of both sides once again produced a terrifying explosion. One after another, countless void instantly collapsed with a loud rumble. Roar! Yishuan's incarnation of Star Beast roared violently, and the terrifying sound waves instantly swept out in circles. The torrent of energy burst out of the magic sword he spat out was even more terrifying in an instant, and the light was even brighter. Bang! With a loud roar, the sword light that Yishukong slashed out began to shatter inch by inch in the void. How could this be? Yishukong looked at the scene in front of him, and suddenly felt a little incredulous. In such a short time, Yishuan had actually become so much stronger. Just now, the sword could nail him to the ground, but now, it could not do anything to him. This was something he never expected. The Son of God can't even suppress Yishuan. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them in a daze. Not only Yishikon, but even they were also stunned. However, the torrent formed by the magic sword that Yishiwen spat out did not seem to have any intention of stopping. After the opponent was gone, it quickly and crazily swept up, like a terrifying tornado, and instantly blasted towards Yishikon. "What son of God, you shall all be defeated!" Yishiwen laughed in a strange manner. He only felt that a brutal thought was trying to shake his absolute calmness. This thought was trying to affect his willpower. That was the instinct of a beast, not his instinct as a human. After integrating the star beast's bloodline and obtaining huge benefits, naturally, he would not be completely unaffected. It was just that he had always been completely suppressed by Yishiwen. "Break!" At this time, Yishikon roared, and slashed out several shocking sword lights in a row, trying to block the terrifying sword light spat out by Yishiwen. But at this time, it was obviously too late. Yishiwen, who had become more and more terrifying, broke through several shocking sword lights in a row, and directly hit his body. Boom! At the same time that Yishikon stimulated the bloodline in his body, this was the first time he was directly hit by Yishiwen. Originally, he completely suppressed Yishiwen, but now, after absorbing the Divine Way law, Yishiwen's strength was not just a little bit. The offensive and defensive momentum of both sides were reversed almost in an instant. Boom! His figure slammed into a mountain, directly smashing out a huge pit in this mountain range. Damn, how can this be? Yishikon finally lost his composure. He no longer had his previous calm and noble posture. Because previously, in his opinion, whether it was a genius or a monstrous talent, compared with the Son of God, they were far from being an opponent, so he did not need to care too much. But now, he was actually seriously injured in Yishiwen's hands. Yishiwen's strength suddenly increased to this level in a short time. This was absolutely unexpected, and absolutely unacceptable. He, a dignified Son of God, actually could not suppress Yishiwen in a situation where he had the advantage in terms of realm. This was simply a great shame. It's all thanks to that sword of yours. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to comprehend so much. To reach this step today, it may take a few years. Yishiwen laughed. The face of the star beast outside him became more and more ferocious, and the brutal will became more and more intense, trying to control his actions. If there was no Mingxin ancient tree, the average person would have already become a complete madman. No matter how firm Yishiwen's will was, it would be useless. He actually comprehended the sword essence from that one strike? Countless people were shocked and stunned. If it were them, they would have been nailed to the ground on the spot, but he was the complete opposite. Not only did he not die, but he also comprehended something from it, and became much stronger all of a sudden. Such a person could no longer be described as a monstrous talent. It's reversed, the situation has actually reversed. This time, I'm afraid Yishiwen will win. Everyone once again changed their views on this battle, as if both sides were amazingly strong, and it was a matter of course for either of them to win in the end. Even if Yishikon was the Son of God, it seemed that it was not certain that he would win. Yishikon was seriously injured by Yishiwen's sword, but as the Son of God, he had the blood of the gods flowing in his body. Even if he did not have the Phoenix regeneration technique like Yishiwen, his recovery ability was still great to a terrifying extent. It would not take long for him to fully recover, but would Yishiwen give him such a chance to recover? Of course not. Yishiwen was now more and more able to feel that the brutal will was actually trying to affect his will. He must not let this situation continue. Yishiwen made a judgment almost in an instant. Although his figure was huge, but with the addition of the demon wings, his speed was still terrifying. Boom! Before Yishikon had time to react, he saw a huge claw directly smashing down from the sky. Boom! His entire body was pressed down by this huge claw, and the entire ground completely collapsed, directly blasting a huge pit in the ground. Almost instantly, countless strands of sword chi surged out from the huge claw and rushed towards him. Boom! He was directly blasted out, and his figure flew directly into the air. He was about to struggle, but saw a huge black shadow instantly swept over. Another huge claw smashed down. Boom! His figure was instantly blasted away like a cannonball. Boom! 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 Yi Shukong's figure was blasted away countless times by Yi Shiwen, like a sandbag in the air, constantly being blasted away by Yi Shiwen. He did not have time to recover at all. Even if he was the son of God, and had the bloodline of God, when facing the current Yi Shiwen, he still felt completely powerless. Boom! Once again, Yi Shukong was blasted heavily to the ground, no longer struggling to move. He still wanted to move, but there was no way at all. A white light flashed, and he was directly teleported out. In other words, his injuries had reached the standard of automatic surrender, and he was not allowed to continue fighting. This was also the method used by the Yi family to protect the participating disciples. Looking at Yi Shukong, who turned into a white light and was teleported out, everyone was still in a daze, unable to believe it. It was over just like that. Yi Shukong, the son of God whom they regarded as impossible to be defeated, was actually defeated, and in the end, he was directly defeated by Yi Shiwen without any chance to fight back. There was no luck at all. However, no matter what they thought, it was already indisputable that Yi Shiwen won the final championship. Chapter 12:21. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the god's child Yi Shukong was defeated by Yi Shiwen. Moreover, he was defeated without any provocation. In the end, everyone could see that Yi Shukong was completely suppressed. Yi Shiwen didn't give Yi Shukong any chance at all. His attacks were like a storm that never stopped. If it were them, they would have been defeated long ago. Although either of the two of them could win the championship, with one being the god's child and the other being a monster, they were going tit for tat and didn't give way to each other. However, when they saw Yi Shukong being defeated in the end, everyone was stunned. It wasn't strange for Yi Shiwen to defeat anyone with his strength. However, his opponent was the god's child whom everyone thought was unbeatable, and Yi Shukong who defeated him with a lower realm. The eyes of many experts from other clans flickered. They didn't come in vain this time. At least they knew where the Yi clan's hidden trump card was. If this god's child was allowed to grow up quietly, he would become an extremely terrifying expert once he was born in the future. No one would be able to restrain him. As for Yi Shiwen, although they were still paying attention to him, they didn't pay as much attention to him as the god's child Yi Shukong. Although Yi Shiwen's potential seemed to be stronger than Yi Shukong's, his potential was much worse than Yi Shukong's. No matter how strong he was now, he might be stuck in a certain realm. However, Yi Shukong was the god's child. It could be said that as long as he was given time, he would naturally step into the peak of the celestial realm, and become a powerful figure that could shake the ancient Baron's continent. Yi Shiwen was miles ahead of him. Even if Yi Shiwen defeated Yi Shukong now, in their eyes, he wouldn't receive as much attention as Yi Shukong. Bloodline theory. Although Yi Shiwen didn't believe that a person's bloodline could determine a person's life, he had to admit that many people believed in this theory. In fact, in most cases, this wasn't wrong. People with superior bloodlines could indeed gain the upper hand in many situations. In most cases, people with superior bloodlines would have higher achievements. However, it wasn't absolute. For example, this time, everyone thought that the god's child was invincible, but in the end, he won the final victory and won the championship. Yi Shiwen slowly shed his star beast real body, and returned to his human form. He trod on the light and walked out of the arena. Everyone's eyes were fixed on him. He was the champion of this tournament. He had such qualifications. Everyone's eyes were firmly locked on his body. Yi Shiwen turned a blind eye to them. Soon, a master trod on the light and arrived in front of him, saying, "Yi Shiwen, you are the champion of this year's competition. Come with me, the clan lord wants to see you." Yi Shiwen nodded, and followed this expert towards the depths of the cloud platform. He soon entered the depths of the cloud platform. The enchantment in the depths of the cloud platform directly isolated everyone's sight. So, they couldn't see Yi Shiwen's figure. Yi Shiwen entered into the depths of the cloud platform. He saw towering thrones towering above the clouds in the depths of the cloud platform. Several tyrannical figures were sitting on these thrones. In the middle, on the highest throne, a peerless figure was sitting on it. Although he didn't have a huge body, he had a majestic aura. This was the clan master of the Yi clan, the supreme existence of the Yi clan. Yi Tianqiong. He was a legendary figure. Even in the ancient Baron's continent, Yi Tianqiong was a famous and terrifying figure. His life was a legend to ordinary people. Beside him were the influential figures of the Yi clan. Yi Shiwen greets the clan master. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands and said, "How dare you be so rude in front of the clan master?" Before Yi Tianqiong could speak, a loud shout came from a throne on his left. A middle-aged man shouted at him angrily. Yi Shiwen frowned. Although he didn't know who this person was, he had already classified him as an enemy. It was most likely the higher-ups who weren't friendly to him. He was the champion of the battle conference. It was fine if the higher-ups of the Yi clan didn't try to rope him in, but they were actually trying to suppress him. Had the higher-ups of the Yi clan become so rotten? If that was the case, he didn't mind staying in the Yi clan. He remembered the appearance of this middle-aged man. If possible, he would find a way to get rid of him. If this was spread, probably no one would believe that a warrior in the law manifestation realm would dare to plot against a terrifying heaven realm expert when they just met. However, for Yi Shiwen, this was nothing. As long as someone was hostile to him and tried to deal with him, he wouldn't let them go easily. So what if it was a heaven realm expert? Even if it was a god, he wouldn't be captured without putting up a fight. Yi Shiwen's killing intent didn't escape the eyes of the middle-aged man who had been paying attention to Yi Shiwen. He suddenly flew into a rage. Ever since he entered the heaven realm, he had always been in a high position. No one had ever dared to release killing intent to him, not even this restrained killing intent. In his opinion, Yi Shiwen was simply too daring. He was simply seeking his own death. "How dare you! How lawless! How dare you plot against me in front of me?" The middle-aged man suddenly became furious and roared. "You really have evil intentions. Such a person, even if he grows up in the future, he will be a scourge to our Yi clan. He should be eliminated as soon as possible." The other big shots of the Yi clan looked at Yi Shiwen in astonishment. They couldn't help but think that he was really daring. He actually dared to plot against them, big shots in the heaven realm. Even the word, lawless, was not enough to describe him. He was simply too daring. However, they didn't have any intention of going along with the middle-aged man's idea of erasing Yi Shiwen. This matter hadn't reached the point of being erased yet. "That's enough, Yi Qian!" At this time, the clan master Yi Tianqiong said with a steady and deep voice. "But—" The middle-aged man, Yi Qian, was still very unwilling and glared at Yi Shiwen. He completely didn't expect that Yi Shiwen would dare to plot against him. He had always been the one plotting against others. No one had ever dared to plot against him, not to mention a junior that he didn't even care about. Although Yi Qian was unwilling, he didn't dare to contradict the majesty of the clan master. "Yi Shiwen didn't grow up in our Yi clan. Our Yi clan has never given him any benefits. It's not rude of him to do this," Yi Tianqiong said, which could be considered as the final conclusion of this matter. His eyes were calm and unwavering, so deep that one couldn't see the end of it. He didn't have any fluctuations because of Yi Shiwen's etiquette at all. At his level, how could he not let go of this kind of thing? Etiquette came from the heart. If there was a person who was not convinced at all, even if he was completely polite in front of you every day, so what? And if there was a person who sincerely respected you, so what if he couldn't be polite? Moreover, he knew that Yi Shiwen was after all different from the talents cultivated by the Yi clan. It was not an easy thing to win the hearts of such a person who was born unconventionally. Moreover, everyone knew in their hearts what happened some time ago. "I'm very surprised that you can defeat Yi Shiwen. Although he has been hiding very well, I have always been watching him. I just didn't expect that this time you could force his true self out and defeat him. You are indeed a genius." Yi Tianqiong looked at Yi Shiwen and said with a hint of praise in his tone. Many big shots of the Yi clan, including Yi Shiwen, looked at the clan master with some astonishment. It was the first time they knew that Yi Shiukong was the son of God, and they were shocked. They didn't expect that the clan master had already known about it. They also had a new understanding of the power of the clan master, including Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had a bolder conjecture in his heart. This time, the clan lord had agreed to take out the 9 Revolutions Great Mystery Golden Pill as a reward. Could it be that it was simply for Yi Shiukong? Could it be that he was using this open and above-board way to cultivate Yi Shiukong? Based on the Yi clan master's calm and collected personality, this might be the case. As for Yi Xing, he never thought that without him, Yi Xing would definitely not be a match for Yi Shiukong. In the end, Yi Xing would basically be defeated. In the Yi clan, the relationships were complicated. Any small matter could affect the whole situation, so he had to be careful when dealing with it. Before Yi Shiukong's identity as the son of God was exposed, the clan master could only use this roundabout method to cultivate Yi Shiukong. This was not impossible. A person who could become the clan master would naturally not be a very biased person. Otherwise, he would not have been able to convince everyone. At this time, Yi Tianqiong looked at Yi Shiwen and asked, his eyes slightly anxious. Some time ago, we did not quickly list you as a key cultivation target. Do you disagree? I don't agree, Yi Shiwen said without any hesitation. As expected, he is full of resentment. Such a person should be expelled from the clan. At this time, Yi Qian, who was not far away, spoke again. His voice was a bit cold. It's already good enough that we didn't eliminate such a person, let alone cultivate him. As the saying goes, fire can see through real gold. Time can also test a person's heart. Such a person is not worthy of being cultivated by our Yi clan. The other big shots of the Yi clan did not agree with this statement. Yi Qian was still making a fuss. If it were him, how could he not resent? He was a genius, but the clan didn't nurture him. Not only that, but they were also suppressing him everywhere. Who wouldn't be extremely angry? This was human nature, but Yi Shiwen dared to say it out loud. This proved that he had a pure heart, and wasn't a scheming and shrewd person. If he had said that he was willing at this time, then they would have been afraid of him, and might have even given birth to killing intent in their hearts. Chapter 12:22. As it turned out, Yi Shiwen was right. Sure enough, Yi Tianqiong looked at Yi Shiwen with a satisfied look in his eyes. Although Yi Shiwen said that he was not convinced, in fact, telling the truth was more appreciated by these big shots. Of course, the premise was that it could not be someone like Yi Qian who was biased against Yi Shiwen from the beginning. Yi Shiwen soon came to know that this Yi Qian was the father of Yi Xing's big shot. It wasn't difficult to find out. In fact, many people knew about the relationship between Yi Qian and Yi Xing. This kind of news and rumors had spread far and wide even before Yi Xing had returned to his family. Yi Qian didn't want to hide it. This kind of thing was relatively common among many big shots. So, it wasn't strange at all. There was no doubt that Yi Qian would target Yi Shiwen like this because Yi Xing was eliminated by Yi Shiwen. This was almost without a doubt. Compared to the ambitious Yi Xing, Yi Shiwen and Yi Shiukong could be said to be unexpected guests who came out of nowhere. In fact, if there was no 9 Revolutions Taishian Golden Pill, Yi Shiwen would not have such a strong desire to win. He would not be willing to give up until he won the championship. Of course, Yi Shiwen did not know that there was another very important reason in addition to him eliminating Yi Xing. It was the ownership of the 9 Revolutions Taishian Golden Pill. Yi Qian did not know how much he had to pay to get the patriarch to agree to give the 9 Revolutions Taishian Golden Pill as a reward. Originally, he planned to give it to Yi Xing. However, who knew that Yi Xing would be eliminated by Yi Shiwen? In other words, he suffered a double loss. He had paid a huge price to let Yi Xing obtain the benefits, but now it had completely fallen into Yi Shiwen's hands. How could he not hate Yi Shiwen? Even a big shot like him had to think of a way to get the patriarch to agree to give the 9 revolutions Taishian golden pill as a reward. One could imagine how much he had paid in order to get the patriarch to agree to give the 9 revolutions Taishian golden pill as a reward. Now, all of it had gone to Yishuan. He was so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. It would be strange if he still liked Yishuan. Very good! Yi Tianqiong was very satisfied with Yishuan's answer. It was normal to have complaints. It would be strange if Yishuan didn't have any complaints. In the future, the rewards and resources you will receive will not be reduced. Originally, I wanted to recruit you personally, but since you have already joined the Law Enforcement Hall, I will not say anything more. The Law Enforcement Hall is the law enforcement agency of our Yi family. Joining it will also give you a promising future. Thank you, Patriarch. Yishuan cupped his hands and said. Everything was as he had imagined. If he was a nobody, then he might not even know how he died. However, after he had shown his talent, they didn't dare to look down on him anymore. In this world, only the strong could gain respect no matter where they went. In the eyes of these people, although he wasn't considered a strong person yet, he was still a strong person in the future. In the future, he would be qualified to become one of them. This is your reward. At this time, Yi Tianqiong waved his hand, and a brilliance fell into Yishuan's hand. It was a Qianquan bag. Yishuan immediately used his divine senses to explore it. It was filled with the rewards of this tournament's champion. It was extremely generous. In addition to 200 million spirit crystals, there were many kinds of standard-grade elixirs, swords, spears, halberds, and various kinds of earth-grade martial instruments. Of course, the most important one among them was the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir. In the depths of the Qianquan bag, a golden elixir was sealed and locked in it. The elixir exuded a torrent of medicinal energy, but it was blocked by the barrier to ensure that the medicinal efficacy would not be lost. The elixir exuded amazing spirituality, as if once the barrier was released, it would automatically gain spiritual wisdom and fly away. Yishuan understood that this was a standard-grade elixir. The 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir was finally in his hands. These rewards were quite generous. One must know that 200 million spirit crystals wasn't a small amount even at the peak of Yishuan's wealth. However, 200 million spirit crystals was at least more than half of the wealth of other people. In fact, it might even be all of the wealth of some poor people. Not to mention, there were many different kinds of pills and magic tools. These were not common goods that could be bought outside. Many of them were only rewarded to the outstanding disciples of the Yi family, and were not sold to the public. These rewards were generous, but Yishuan only really cared about the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir. With the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir, today's hard work was worth it. After receiving the rewards, Yishuan did not stay here for a long time. He left the cloud platform and returned to the courtyard of the Luoyes city branch in the guest city. There, Yi Zhuhai, Yi Zhenyan, Yi Mao, Yi Kai, and Yi Qiao were already waiting for him. Second brother, you are so amazing! As soon as Yishuan entered the door, Yi Qiao flew up to him and did not treat him as an outsider. She looked at Yishuan with little stars in her eyes. She did not expect Yishuan to be able to do this. Even the Son of God, Yishukong, was completely defeated by him. This could no longer be described as amazing. She had witnessed that battle with her own eyes. It was simply unimaginable. That kind of battle was not so much a battle between humans, but rather a battle between monsters. That was really beyond their imagination. It was not like a normal human at all. Yi Kai had a similar expression at this time. Anyone who had seen the battle between Yishuan and Yishukong with their own eyes would not be able to remain calm like this. Second brother, tell us quickly, what rewards did you get? Besides the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir, what else did you get? Yi Qiao looked at Yishuan and asked. Yishuan smiled and took out a lot of medicinal pellets and instruments directly from the Qianquan bag. Basically, all of them were divided into 3 parts and distributed to Yi Mao, Yi Kai, and Yi Qiao Qiao. Winner, these are all your hard work. It is not appropriate to give them. Yi Junhai frowned and said. It's okay. These are just worldly possessions for me. Yi Shiwen waved his hand and said. Although many of these medicinal pellets were relatively rare and many of them were even holy healing items, it did not matter to Yi Shiwen, who had the Phoenix regeneration technique. He did not need those celestial weapons. His physical body could easily destroy some low-grade Earth-level celestial weapons. Unless it was the Tianyuan mirror or the emergence immortal exterminating saber, which were extremely powerful Earth-level celestial weapons, they were dispensable to him. However, it was nothing for Yi Shiwen. For Yi Mao, Yi Kai, and Yi Qiao Qiao, there was no doubt that they had made a windfall, especially those Earth-level instruments. Among the rewards that Yi Shiwen received this time, there were many Earth-level instruments. Basically, all of them were above the advanced Earth level. There were even a few top-level Earth-level instruments. For many experts in the law manifestation realm, even a low-level Earth-level instrument was an extravagant hope, let alone the advanced and advanced Earth-level instruments. With these instruments, their combat effectiveness suddenly increased by a level. Yi Kai and Yi Qiao Qiao could even defeat the experts in the first level of the law manifestation realm with the help of the top-level Earth-level instruments. The instruments that were useless to Yi Shiwen were very useful in their hands. It could only be said that Yi Shiwen was too abnormal. Not to mention those medicinal pills, which were naturally extremely beneficial for their future cultivation. Originally, these were only rewarded to the top geniuses. Now, because of Yi Shiwen, they could also enjoy them. Yi Junhai saw that Yi Shiwen's attitude was firm, so he no longer insisted. He believed that Yi Shiwen had his own rational judgment, but he was still very pleased in his heart. Second brother, if you can see winner today, you should be satisfied. Yi Junhai looked at Yi Shiwen with eyes full of gratification. His outstanding posture made it seem as if he had seen Yi Junshan come back to life. With such a son, what more could he ask for? Winner, after the ancestral worship ceremony, let's go and worship your father together, said Yi Junhai. Yi Shiwen nodded. Finally, it was time to face this father that he had never seen before. At the tournament, the matter of Yi Shiwen winning the championship spread like a gust of wind throughout the entire Yi family overnight. All kinds of things about the entire tournament also became a topic that many people took pleasure in talking about. Especially Yi Xing, who was originally favored by many people, was easily surpassed by Yi Shiwen. There was also the matter of God's son Yi Xiukong. Although he was defeated by Yi Shiwen in the end, the title of God's son was already more resounding than Yi Shiwen. Although he was the champion, there were far less people discussing Yi Shiwen than Yi Xiukong. In particular, the shocking battle between the two of them where they were forced to use their trump cards became a battle that everyone recalled. Whether it was Yi Xiukong's activation of the god's descendant bloodline or Yi Shiwen's transformation into Star Beast, it was a rare battle for them. These two people, without a doubt, had great fortuitous encounters. In this aspect, even many heaven-tier experts might not be able to compare to these two people. Especially God's son Yi Xiukong. It was already a great opportunity for him to be able to awaken his bloodline. Was there any greater adventure than this? With this god's descendant bloodline, his future cultivation would be smooth sailing. Cultivation would be as simple as eating and drinking. Yi Shiwen was not an ordinary person either. The fact that he was able to defeat the god's child, Yi Xiukong, with a cultivation level lower than his, in itself showed that his fortuitous encounter was also top-notch. In particular, his tyrannical physique and extraordinary speed were talked about enthusiastically by many people. Many people wanted to investigate, but in the end, they did not know where to start. Yi Shiwen was too mysterious. Yi Xiukong grew up in the Yi family, so it was easy to find out who he was. However, Yi Shiwen had always been outside. And just when everyone was talking about this, the outstanding young geniuses of the younger generation who had performed outstandingly in this tournament had also received the high-level training notice. And regarding Yi Shiwen's training notice, it was also quickly sent to the Luiyes City branch family. Chapter 12:23. In the tournament, some people who performed well would be nurtured by the higher-ups. Of course, depending on the degree of talent they displayed, the nurturing they would receive would naturally be different. Originally, the champion of the tournament should receive the best nurturing and the most resources. However, due to the appearance of the Son of God, Yishukum, he was able to enjoy the same treatment as Yishuin. However, Yishuin didn't care about it. The treatment others received had nothing to do with him. After so many years, he had already gotten used to it. It was better to rely on himself than on others. In this regard, Yishuin felt that the Yi clan had done a much better job than the Yi Yuan sect and the true martial school. As long as one had enough talent, there would naturally be a lot of resources thrown at him. Therefore, the Yi clan was able to prosper for a long time. It wasn't without reason. In addition to some disciples who had a relatively high ranking, there were also those who had tyrannical strength but bad luck. These people would also be nurtured as key-seeded players. After all, the purpose of the tournament was to select geniuses. How could they just watch and not nurture geniuses? Indeed, some people might be lucky enough to occupy a higher position. However, most of the time, wasn't luck also a part of one's strength? One shouldn't underestimate the importance of luck in one's strength. Some people were born with great luck and would trip over spiritual treasures when they went out. Then, they would accidentally subdue a spiritual beast after tripping. Such a heaven-defying thing had happened before in the ancient Barons continent. These people didn't seem to be very strong. Sometimes, they were even pitifully weak. However, there was no way to kill them. Moreover, any enemy would inexplicably encounter some problems. For example, they would go berserk on the spot, be stabbed to death by a sword, or suddenly be chased by a monster. This kind of nonsensical thing would often happen to these people's opponents. Therefore, something like luck might seem nonsensical and funny, but in fact, it was very likely to happen. Therefore, no one dared to underestimate these people with heaven-defying luck. Otherwise, if they were to go against them, they might accidentally step into a pit, fall into a seal, or choke to death while drinking water. Because the opponent's luck was strong, conversely, it was their own luck that was bad. After every competition, there would always be a group of people who stood out from the crowd and were then heavily nurtured by the family. This was also the reason why there were so many people signing up to participate in the tournament every time. Although their strength was far from enough, they were all gambling on their luck. In the past, there had been cases where, although their strength was not enough, they had relied on good luck to charge all the way to the top 10. Moreover, even if he couldn't make it into the top 10, he would still be able to get a lot of rewards if he could pass one more round. Therefore, many people chose to participate in the competition. Law Enforcement Hall's Heavenly Prison? Yishuin had received a notice to go to the Law Enforcement Hall's Heavenly Prison. Yishuin soon came to know what kind of place the Law Enforcement Hall's Heavenly Prison was. There was a place called the Heavenly Prison in the Yi clan. It was used to imprison all kinds of criminals of the Yi clan. Basically, it was a dangerous place in the eyes of outsiders. In addition, the Heavenly Prison was also a secret training place for the elite disciples of the Law Enforcement Hall. Generally speaking, only some elite disciples could enjoy such treatment. Yishuin had now joined the Law Enforcement Hall. Naturally, the Law Enforcement Hall would personally take care of him if he wanted to be nurtured. It was not the turn of other institutions to intervene. However, it was not easy even for the elites of the Law Enforcement Hall to enter the Heavenly Prison to practice because it was not free of charge. One must have a certain amount of contribution points to exchange for the time to practice in the Heavenly Prison. However, it was said that 1 day of practice in the Heavenly Prison was equivalent to 10 days outside. One's cultivation would progress at lightning speed. It was said that Yizhintian had personally given the order to allow Yishuin to practice in the Heavenly Prison for a year because he had won the championship of this competition. Of course, as long as Yishuin could continue to make enough contributions for the Law Enforcement Hall, then he could continue to practice in the Heavenly Prison. This Heavenly Prison was the common property of the entire Yi clan. Therefore, even the hall master of the law enforcement hall like Yi Zhentian couldn't casually allow anyone to practice in it. Before Yishuwen, Yi Shui had already entered into closed-door practice. It was said that she was practicing in the heavenly prison. Yi Shui had served the law enforcement hall for many years. Coupled with her own talent, no one knew how many contribution points she had accumulated. At least, it was enough for her to practice in the heavenly prison for a long time. Yishuwen calculated it himself. If he were to include the contribution points he had accumulated through the Martial Essence Tower and the competition, it would be enough for him to practice in the heavenly prison for several years. He suddenly realized that it was actually very easy for him to accumulate these contribution points. The more talented one was, the easier it was to accumulate these contribution points. For ordinary people, they might need to accumulate contribution points for hundreds of years before they could accumulate enough contribution points to practice in the heavenly prison for a year. Of course, this was also because the contribution points were far more than that. They couldn't be like Yishuwen and use all of them to exchange for medicinal pellets and instruments. After all, there were only a few people like Yishuwen who were self-sufficient. It just so happens that you go to the heavenly prison to practice for a year. At that time, the ancestral worship ceremony will be over. You can come out of closed-door practice and go with us to pay respects to your father. When Yishuwen told Yi Junhai about this matter, Yi Junhai pondered for a while and said directly, "But big brother, the heavenly prison is known as the graveyard of geniuses. Even the existence known as geniuses in the outside world will suffer heavy casualties after entering," Yi Zhenyan said with concern. Yi Kai and Yi Qiao also didn't make a fuss. Obviously, they also knew the illustrious reputation of the heavenly prison. Although it was said that practicing in that place for a year was equivalent to practicing outside for 10 years, practicing in that place for a year could simply reduce one's lifespan by 10 years. It was still possible to survive. Many people who were known as geniuses became disabled in there, and there was no way for them to recover forever. "It doesn't matter, third uncle. There is no place in this world that can't stop me. A man should accept hardships." Yishuwen waved his hand and said. He was the least afraid of this kind of hardships. Along the way, he had experienced all kinds of hardships. These were just trivial things for him. Well said. Winter grew up outside the family. He is not a flower in a greenhouse. How can those so-called geniuses be compared with Winter? I believe that Winter is absolutely fine. At this time, Yi Junhai nodded and said, after Yishuwen showed that he could defeat the Son of God, he was not so worried about Yishuwen anymore. In other words, he was not worried at all. Yishuwen could even defeat the Son of God. Obviously, Yishuwen's hidden strength was much deeper than theirs. Although it was distressing for such a child to grow up in the outside world, it was also more reassuring. In that case, I won't say much. You have to be careful in the heavenly prison. Yi Zhenyan did not say anything more. He was a person with a fiery temper. He was only worried about Yishuwen, the only son of his second brother. Otherwise, he would not have said anything more. And Yishuwen nodded. The ancestral worship ceremony would last for about a year. There were many cumbersome procedures to be carried out. When Yishuwen came out of the heavenly prison, it would almost be over. At that time, Yishuwen could go to worship Yi Junshan again. These were all completely possible. However, Yishuwen did not intend to go directly to the heavenly prison. He had now entered the peak of the third level of the law manifestation realm. He was only one step away from entering the fourth level of the law manifestation realm. This was all thanks to the comprehension in Yi Shukong's sword. Now, he was only one step away from the breakthrough. He had already made up his mind to go to the heavenly prison after the breakthrough. He had only heard about the heavenly prison. He was not clear about the specific situation. He could only choose to enhance his strength as much as possible. After making up his mind, Yishuwen immediately set up the array in the small courtyard of the branch family in Luoyes City and began to retreat. Second brother went to retreat again. It's really boring, Seeing that Yi Shiwen went to retreat again, Yi Qiao pouted and said while kicking the stones in the yard with her little feet. That's why Brother Wen has such amazing strength. If you are willing to work harder and retreat, will you be stuck in the half-step law manifestation realm? Yi Mao said with a straight face. In fact, whether it was Yi Kai or Yi Qiao, their talents were not bad, but their temperament was unstable. They were already hundreds of years old, but they were still like children. However, according to their lifespan of at least thousands of years, at this time, they were indeed just children. However, they had to sigh in their hearts. If Yi Shiwen did not seize all the time to cultivate, how could he have this strength? He could even defeat the Son of God. Did this strength fall from the sky? 1 minute on the stage, 10 years of work off the stage. Everyone could only see the glory in front of others. How many could see his efforts behind the scenes? Yi Shiwen naturally did not know what was happening outside. At this time, apart from attaching a trace of spirit to the barrier to guard, he had devoted himself to cultivation. He had already entered the peak of the 3rd level of the law manifestation realm. At this time, he was only a thin layer of window paper away from the 4th level of the law manifestation realm. He could break through at any time. He sat cross-legged on the bed. Countless bloodstones were dissolved into blood qi and then instilled into his body, causing his body to emit bursts of blood qi. Chapter 12:24. The power of the stars in his body began to be mobilized, and a huge amount of spiritual yuan formed a storm around his body, spewing out from every pore on his body. If not for the formation concealing all the aura, many people would have been alarmed by this time. Under his mobilization, countless blood qi turned into spiritual yuan and began to crazily rush at the barrier of the 4th level of the transcendence realm. For an ordinary person, it would be very easy for them to make a breakthrough if they had the same level of cultivation as Yi Shiwen. However, although Yi Shiwen's cultivation was much thicker than that of an ordinary person, but at the same time, each step was also much more difficult than that of an ordinary person. Every breakthrough was much more difficult than ordinary people's. In the depths of his divine sense, countless rays of light from the Minxin ancient tree shrouded his sea of consciousness, allowing him to be in a state of enlightenment at any time and place. This was an advantage that ordinary people could not imagine. Even the Son of God couldn't enter the state of epiphany at any time and place like him. However, Yi Shiwen could naturally enter the state of epiphany as long as he had enough lingqi. For ordinary people, this wasn't as simple as a monstrous talent. In the process of him constantly breaking through the barrier of the 4th level of the transcendence realm, 10 days had finally passed. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye, and many people did not even feel the passage of time. During these 10 days, the discussion about Yi Shiwen and the Son of God was still in progress. In particular, the various magical performances of the Son of God, Yi Shiwen had already opened everyone's eyes. After that, he was personally taken in by the clan head and became the clan head's personal disciple. Later, he was personally taken away by the clan head to be groomed. With the clan head's level of daily affairs, now that he had taken Yi Shiwen away to be groomed personally, one could imagine how important Yi Shiwen was in the clan head's heart. If other geniuses could only be said to have a chance to enter the celestial realm in the future, then the Son of God would definitely be able to reach the clan head's level in the future, and even grow to become an expert even more tyrannical than the clan head. That was why the patriarch looked at him differently. In the eyes of the higher-ups, Yi Shiwen certainly had a lot of potential, but there was obviously a big gap between him and the Son of God, Yi Su Kong, who had awakened the bloodline of the gods. Although he was defeated by Yi Shiwen, no one would underestimate him because of that. The contest between these Heaven's Pride experts wasn't just limited to 1 or 2 matches. On the contrary, they would compete for thousands of years in the future. A momentary victory or defeat didn't mean anything at all. In fact, many people believed that although Yi Shiwen had defeated Yi Shukong now, he might have to crawl under Yi Shukong's feet in the future. But even so, Yi Shiwen and Yi Shukong were still the focus of everyone's discussion, especially since these two people could not be regarded as cultivated by the family. Even Yi Xing, who was ranked third, appeared as an illegitimate child. Many people began to reflect on whether there was really a problem with the entire family's cultivation system. None of the top 3 in this year's tournament had any obvious relationship with the family, which meant that Yi Xing could be considered to have been secretly cultivated by a big shot. On the other hand, the growth of Yi Shiwen and Yi Shukong obviously had nothing to do with the entire family. Although Yi Shukong grew up in the family, his growth had little to do with the family. He was completely self-taught, and all kinds of martial arts were mostly self-created, or came from the awakening of bloodline memories. And Yi Shiwen had nothing to do with the Yi family at all. He purely grew up outside. They could grow to this level without relying on the family's resources. In addition to showing their outstanding talent, it also proved that the family's cultivation system was a failure. However, these had nothing to do with Yi Shiwen, who was in closed-door training. He rarely really cared about the comments of the outside world. 10 days later, in the room, Yi Shiwen suddenly opened his eyes, and then the spiritual energy in his body was like a flood that could not be stopped at all. It completely poured out, turning into a torrent that swept in all directions. The formation that was originally set up could not withstand the impact of this torrent, and was instantly broken. This powerful aura instantly rushed up to the sky. Yi Juhai, Yi Zhenyan, and the others who had been watching Yi Shiwen's closed-door training also discovered this immediately. They were very pleased to see Yi Shiwen constantly improving, and their hearts were also very satisfied. Soon, the aura that originally rushed up to the sky disappeared without a trace, and was absorbed into Yi Shiwen's body. Finally, he was at the 4th level of the law manifestation realm. His combat power had also entered a whole new realm. He could even compete with the masters at the 7th level of the law manifestation realm. This wasn't just a simple matter, as his combat power had increased by 1 level. In the transcendence realm, before the 4th level of the transcendence realm, he could only be regarded as the early stage of the transcendence realm. Before the 7th level of the transcendence realm, he could only be regarded as the middle stage of the transcendence realm. Only by truly stepping into the 7th level of the transcendence realm could he be regarded as stepping into the late stage of the transcendence realm. Compared to the middle stage of the transcendence realm, it was a huge step. It was definitely not as simple as a little improvement. Instead, he had risen to a whole new level and was completely different from before. If it was the him from 10 days ago, he would definitely not be a match for the current him. In fact, he might not even be able to withstand a few moves before being completely defeated. This was a complete transformation of his strength. After breaking through to the 4th level of the law manifestation realm, Yi Shiwen did not continue closed-door training. As for consolidating the realm, he could do it in the law enforcement prison. Law enforcement prison, the tomb of the legendary genius. I'm coming. Yi Shiwen's eyes were bright. The next day, early in the morning, Yi Shiwen bid farewell to his first uncle, third uncle, and Yi Mao, and went to the law enforcement city. Although the law enforcement hall had branches in various places, the headquarters was in the law enforcement city. As the headquarters of the law enforcement hall, the law enforcement city was naturally the most important place. It could be said that there were many masters in it. There was a tyrannical aura in the sky all year round to deter opponents from acting rashly. Although it was just a city, it was the headquarters of the law enforcement hall. There were all kinds of spaces in it. Ordinary people couldn't see them at all. They could only enter and exit them by special methods. The law enforcement prison itself was a special space that didn't exist in the main plane. Only in this way was it the safest. Even if some people wanted to break into the prison, they couldn't find a place to enter. Moreover, there were many experts of the celestial realm in the law enforcement city. The law enforcement prison was a place where numerous felons of the Yi family were imprisoned, so it could be regarded as an impregnable fortress. At this time, the law enforcement city was very lively. Countless masters went in and out. As it was the Yi clan's ancestral worship ceremony, many masters in the law enforcement city had to rush to the Yi clan to be responsible for the safety of the Yi clan. The law enforcement hall and the dark hall worked together to suppress all unstable factors. The Yi clan's ancestral worship ceremony was only held once every 100 years. If such an important day was disrupted, the Yi clan's face would be lost to the entire ancient Baron's continent. At this time, everyone in the Yi clan had to work together to maintain stability. The task of the Law Enforcement Hall, which was in charge of the laws, was several times heavier than usual. Because the Law Enforcement Hall was in charge of the laws on the surface, many trivial matters needed to be handled by the Law Enforcement Hall. The Dark Hall, on the other hand, only appeared in the dark to clean up some unstable factors. They were responsible for a different direction. Fortunately, Yi Shiwen was already a silver disciple. He did not need to care about those things. Otherwise, he would be annoyed to death. After Yi Shiwen arrived at the law enforcement city, someone was waiting for him at the side. He guided him to the law enforcement prison. It was an elder of the law enforcement hall. His aura was restrained and solemn. He only took a glance at Yi Shiwen. "You are Yi Shiwen?" Although Yi Shiwen had a great reputation now, it was normal for the old antiques who were in charge of the law enforcement city all year round to not know him. These people might not leave the law enforcement city for thousands of years. The rise of the younger generation was meaningless to them. They might have seen too much in their lifetime. They might even be one of them in the past. They didn't care about supervising the rising and falling of the clouds. "Yes." Yi Shiwen nodded. "Follow me." The elder turned around and walked towards the depths of the law enforcement city. Many experts of the law enforcement city made way for him when they saw the elder. "Follow me. Don't take a wrong step. The law enforcement prison is the most important place in the law enforcement city. There are traps and arrays at every step. If you take a wrong step, you might be killed by the arrays. No one can save you by then," said the elder faintly. "And?" Yi Shiwen nodded. He would not show off at this time. The law enforcement prison was located in the depths of the law enforcement city. The space gate was also arranged there. Compared to other places, the law enforcement prison was the most important place. Yi Shiwen saw a huge gate standing in the void from afar. It was empty and there was nothing. However, Yi Shiwen knew that this was the gate to the law enforcement prison. They had just entered the boundary of the law enforcement heavenly prison. They hadn't even reached the gate yet. Suddenly, they felt countless tyrannical gazes falling on them. However, they only glanced at them for a moment, and quickly retracted their gazes. Rumble! There was a rumbling sound in front of them as the huge door slowly opened. A figure leapt out from within. It was a young man wearing a luxurious robe and a feathered crown. He had an arrogant expression and a sharp aura. It was obvious that he had just come out of the Enforcer Heavenly Prison. Yi Shiwen walked slowly towards the gate under the guidance of the elder. When the three of them passed by, the young man suddenly said, "Wait a minute!" Chapter 12:25. Wait a minute! The young man stopped Yi Shiwen and Yi Shiwen. The young man looked at Yi Shiwen and said in a slightly cold voice. The aura on his body was sharp and it was obvious that he was not an ordinary person. "What's wrong? Do you have something to say?" Yi Shiwen asked with some doubts. "You are Yi Shiwen, right?" The young man looked at Yi Shiwen and said, "Yes." Yi Shiwen was slightly vigilant in his heart. This young man actually knew his name. It seemed that he was not an ordinary person. "I've heard people mention your name, even in the Heavenly Law Enforcement Prison. You seem to be very famous recently. It just so happens that I came out of the Heavenly Law Enforcement Prison to find you. It's great that I've met you now." The young man had a bit of arrogance on his face. He looked a bit arrogant. "Looking for me?" Yi Shiwen revealed a somewhat puzzled look on his face, but in fact, he was even more vigilant in his heart. This matter was not that simple no matter how he looked at it. "Yes, I am looking for you," the young man said faintly. The arrogant look on his face did not change at all. "My name is Yi Yuhan. I know that you have obtained the 9 Revolutions Taishian Golden Pill in this competition." The young man, Yi Yuhan, continued. "Don't you know you're in big trouble? This 9 revolving Taishian golden elixir is the key to entering Tianyuan realm. From the moment you got it, many people have been plotting against you for it. This is the 9 revolutions Taishian golden pill that was bestowed by the patriarch. Do you think they can snatch it by force? Yishuwen replied and looked at the elder again. The elder was standing with his hands clasped behind his back. He seemed to have no interest in these disputes. It was as if he did not hear the conversation between the two young warriors. Indeed, the 9 revolution Taishian gold elixir was personally rewarded by the family head. They wouldn't dare to snatch it unless they're tired of living. Although they can't snatch it openly, what can you do if they do it secretly? Can you not go out for the rest of your life? Any small move and you will die without a burial place. Yu Yuhan glanced at Yishuwen and said, although she knew about his prestige, but she didn't care about him at all. Yishuwen narrowed his eyes. This was indeed a very realistic problem. They wouldn't dare to attack Yishuwen in the Yi family. However, it was hard to say if they were to leave the Yi family. In the Yi family, there were as many experts as there were clouds, and there were too many people. There were hundreds of millions of people, and when there were too many people, their hearts would naturally not be united. Some people might look at the big picture, but there were also people who were selfish. The attraction of the 9 revolution Taishian golden elixir was too great. In the ancient Baron's continent, the law manifestation realm and the celestial realm were like two extreme levels of life. The law manifestation realm experts were considered as the backbone experts in the ancient Baron's continent. Although they had a certain status, they were essentially insignificant figures. Only when they entered the celestial realm could they be considered as a big figure in the entire ancient Baron's continent. Only in the ancient Baron's continent could their words carry weight, and no one dared to ignore the opinion of a celestial realm expert. However, in the ancient Baron's continent, there were very few law manifestation realm experts who could enter the celestial realm. There might not even be 1 in 100 people, and this ratio might even be lower. Even those geniuses and geniuses wouldn't think that they could definitely enter the celestial realm. Among the younger generation this time, only the Son of God, Yishuwen, was believed to reach the celestial realm and the peak of the celestial realm. In the future, he would have the opportunity to stand side by side with legendary figures like the Yi family's patriarch. As for the others, although they had potential, if one of them could enter the celestial realm, it would be a waste of their family's nurturing. From this, it could be seen what kind of status the celestial realm had in the entire ancient Baron's continent. Because of this, it was easy to know how attractive the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir was to these people. No one could guarantee that they could enter the celestial realm. However, if they had the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir, then everything would be completely different. Although the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir might not be able to increase the success rate by 100%, no one who had taken the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir had ever failed. Therefore, the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir in Yishuwen's hands had also attracted a lot of attention. He was very clear about this. Even when he just left the Luoyes City branch family, he felt many eyes on him. Some even openly and unscrupulously stared at him, as if they weren't afraid that Yishuwen would discover them. Or perhaps, they thought that even if Yishuwen discovered them, he wouldn't be able to do anything. This kind of unscrupulousness made Yishuwen extremely angry. However, he knew that there were many unknown forces in the Yi family. Before he figured it out, he shouldn't be too high profile. If he was in the true martial school, if someone dared to spy on him so unscrupulously, he would have been completely wiped out by him. However, this person was obviously here for the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir. For the sake of the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir, he actually ran out of the law enforcement heavenly prison. Yishuwen already vaguely knew what he meant. Yishuwen, I know about your deeds and you're a smart person. Now many people are eyeing your 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir covetously. And as far as I know, there seem to be forces that aren't friendly enough to you in the entire upper echelons. So according to what I mean, it's actually very simple. As long as you hand over the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir, our golden jade pavilion can guarantee that no one will dare to trouble you again. Our golden jade pavilion is also very powerful in the upper echelons. If you choose to rely on us, even if there are troubles in the upper echelons, we can also settle these things for you. What do you think? Yi Yuhan looked at Yi Shiwen and said. There was a bit of frivolity in his application. Obviously, he didn't think that Yi Shiwen would refuse. Perhaps in his opinion, Yi Shiwen couldn't refuse at all. This condition was already very good for anyone. Of course, we will also compensate you. We won't let you suffer any losses. At that time, our Prince Jean will personally come forward to guide your cultivation. You will soon be able to enter the 4th heaven of the law manifestation realm, or even the 5th heaven. This is not a problem. If I can't protect the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir, do you think your golden jade pavilion can? Yi Shiwen finally heard this from his mouth. A disdainful smile flashed across his face. He was not completely ignorant about this golden jade pavilion. In the Yi family, various organizations ran amok. In addition to the basic composition of the main family and the branch families, there were also the Law Enforcement Hall, the Dark Hall, and many other organizations. In addition to these formal organizations, there were many small groups. Some tyrannical disciples would form their own team, just like how Yi Shiwen formed the Qianyu Pavilion in the beginning. With their own team, there would be a group of people who would serve them. The Golden Jade Pavilion was one of the very large small groups. There were 2 leaders, known as Prince Jean and Prince Yu. When the 2 joined forces, they were the top existences even among the younger generation of the Yi family. In the younger generation of the Yi family, naturally, there would not only be Yi Shui and a few others. There were some who were older than them but were still regarded as the top masters of the younger generation. They were all the top heaven's favorites of the past, but they had reached the upper limit of their age. Therefore, most of the time, they were transferred to the second line. However, this did not mean that they were not paid attention to. On the contrary, with the improvement of their strength, their forces became more and more tyrannical. Some of them were even able to organize huge forces comparable to formal organizations. These were the real strength of the younger generation. As for the reason why Yi Shui and the others were so famous, it was because they disdained to compete for fame and fortune. They had also been so glorious in the past. In the future, Yi Shui and the others would also join these people. This was an inevitable rule. Therefore, Yi Yuhan simply did not put Yi Shiwen in his eyes. In his opinion, no matter how strong Yi Shiwen was, he was only a young master of this generation. He was several generations older than Yi Shiwen. In terms of strength and experience, he was far above Yi Shiwen. Not to mention, Yi Shiwen was just a guy who had returned from outside. Although he had asked Yi Shiwen for help, he still did not put him in his eyes. Of course. Yi Yuhan's face showed a bit of arrogance. You came back from the outside, so you probably don't understand the position of Golden Pavilion in the Yi clan. It can be said that, apart from the 5 hegemons, our Golden Pavilion can be ranked in the top 10 even among the many heavens chosen. Compared to us, the others are just second-rate forces. They must be tired of living if they dare to have ideas on our Golden Pavilion. Even among the higher-ups of our family, we have enough connections. We can come forward and settle those things for you that you can't settle. For us, these are just trivial matters. How about it? Have you thought about it? After you hand over the 9 revolutions' mysterious golden pill to us, there will be no trouble. Yi Shiwen's face revealed a somewhat sarcastic expression. Did they really think that he was scared? After he joined the Law Enforcement Hall, he was listed as a key genius to be trained. Even Yi Zhentian would always pay attention to his progress. Even Yi Zhentian did not dare to say that he could settle the matters of the higher-ups for Yi Shiwen and persuade those people not to target Yi Shiwen anymore. He could only say that he would increase the protection of Yi Shiwen. Who did their Golden Pavilion think they were? They actually dared to boast that even the Law Enforcement Hall could not settle the matter. Or this was simply a gimmick. In fact, they did not intend to solve the problem for Yi Shiwen at all. They only wanted to cheat Yishuan of the 9 revolutions' mysterious golden pill. Chapter 1226. Yishuan had experienced all kinds of situations in his life. In this kind of matter, he could immediately see that this golden pavilion had no intention of solving the problem for him. Even if they had their own contacts among those big shots, could they dictate the actions of those big shots? This was simply impossible. They just wanted to cheat the 9 revolutions Taishian golden pill first. As for Yishuan, perhaps in their eyes, he was nothing at all. They wanted him to obediently hand over the 9 revolutions Taishian golden pill with just a few words. Did they really think that he was scared and had no knowledge? I think you Golden Pavilion don't need to worry about this matter, Yishuan said with a faint smile as if he didn't care about this matter at all. Whether it was the words of Golden Pavilion or various threats, they didn't care about it. Yuhan was stunned for a moment because he didn't expect that Yishuan would actually refuse. Perhaps the past experience was too smooth. In the past, as long as the name of Golden Pavilion was mentioned, then it was simply successful. No one dared to refuse Golden Pavilion, and no one dared to refuse both Prince Jean and Prince Yu. This was something that had never happened before. Suddenly his face turned cold, and he looked at Yishuan and said, "You have to think clearly. If you refuse Golden Pavilion, then not only will you not get our protection, on the contrary, you will also be included in the list of enemies of Golden Pavilion." Yishuan's refusal made Yuhan feel that his self-esteem was somewhat damaged. Suddenly his complexion turned slightly ferocious. If he could, he wouldn't mind letting this arrogant brat know how much weight he had. Our Golden Pavilion's 2 leaders, Prince Jean and Prince Yu, have already entered the peak of law manifestation realm. If you go against them, you should know what the consequences are. Yuhan continued to threaten. You don't need to worry about this. I'm not scared. How is it possible to scare me? Yishuan sneered and didn't put his threat in his eyes at all. You really don't know what's good for you. Do you think you'll be fine after entering the law enforcement hall? There are many experts of our Golden Pavilion in the law enforcement hall. Even if you escape to the ends of the earth, it will be useless. Yuhan threatened. The elder next to her had a calm and unperturbed look on his face. He simply didn't care about Yuhan's threat. In other words, in his opinion, perhaps this was just a group of children fighting. It happened many times a day, so what was there to pay attention to? Humph, then let them make a move. I'd like to see who dares to make a move against me. At that time, don't blame me for being ruthless. Yishuan sneered and said, It seems that I have been too weak recently, so much so that even some Tom, Dick, and Harry dares to nag at me. What? How dare you say that I'm a nobody? Yuhan's complexion suddenly turned gloomy. He boasted that he was a genius, and he didn't put Yishuan in his eyes at all. However, the result was that he was despised by Yishuan. How could he accept such a result? Since you're so stubborn and refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, then I'll show you the gap between you and us. Don't think that you can be arrogant in front of me just because you defeated Yi Xing and the others. I don't even care about the current god's child, Yi Xiukong. Yi Xiukong suddenly roared and clenched his fist. Suddenly, countless cracks appeared on the spiritual energy around him. A terrifying power began to condense in his hand and he fiercely punched towards Yishuan. 10-direction destruction fist! This was another Yi family's ancient lost technique. One punch could destroy everything in all directions and reverse the universe. It was exceptionally terrifying. Under the pressure of his terrifying fist, there was suddenly an aura of destruction in the surroundings. There was an aura of eternal destruction everywhere. His strength had actually increased to the 7th level of the Transcendence realm. It was extremely tyrannical. No wonder he didn't care about Yishuan and the others. Because in his eyes, Yishuan and the others were only at the 6th level of the Transcendence realm. They were nothing at all. Although the 6th level of the Transcendence realm and the 7th level of the Transcendence realm were only 1 level apart, in terms of strength, the difference was like heaven and earth. Many people couldn't enter the 7th level from the 6th level of the Transcendence realm in their lifetime. Even if they might have a more glorious future in the future, at least for now, they were not enough to compete with him. This 10-direction destruction fist has actually been cultivated to this level. This Yi Yuhan is not bad. At this time, some divine senses appeared around them. The confrontation between Yi Shiwen and Yi Yuhan had attracted the attention of the masters passing by nearby. Yes, this 10-direction destruction fist is said to be a secret of the Yi family. I don't know how it was obtained by the people of the Golden Jade Pavilion. Now, only the higher-ups of the Golden Jade Pavilion can cultivate this terrifying technique. Yes, these small organizations like the Golden Jade Pavilion are really getting more and more powerful. They are gradually on the same level as our big organizations. Yes, Prince Jean and Prince Yu are already at the peak of the Transcendence realm. If they enter the Celestial realm one day in the future, it will be even more incredible. No wonder they are plotting to obtain the 9 revolutions Taishian golden elixir that the master rewarded to Yi Shiwen. If it were me, I would also be tempted. Yes, I'm afraid Yi Shiwen is in trouble now. These young masters are indeed powerful, but unfortunately, there is still a gap between them and these seniors. This 10-directional destruction fist instantly brought the surroundings into a scene of eternal destruction. It was an all-out attack. Although he didn't put Yi Shiwen in his eyes, but at that time, he was well aware that even a lion would use its full strength to capture a rabbit. He went all out right from the start, and didn't want to give Yi Shiwen any chance to fight back. The fist pressure instantly shrouded Yi Shiwen from top to bottom, completely blocking all the space around Yi Shiwen. In an instant, Yi Shiwen seemed to be completely shrouded by a crazy storm. There was a somewhat hideous smile on his face as if he could see the scene of Yi Shiwen being blown up by the fist. It's just a small trick. Yi Shiwen shouted softly. He stretched out his hands and tore out countless golden lights. He directly slapped the 10-direction destruction fist that was like a storm. Boom! A terrifying explosion sounded. The terrifying torrent of fist pressure was blocked by Yi Shiwen with his bare hands. Even his figure didn't move at all. He was like a god who had fallen into the mortal world, making people worship him. This is impossible. Yi Yuhan saw that his all-out attack was easily blocked by Yi Shiwen. He couldn't pose any threat to Yi Shiwen at all. In fact, he had never seen anyone who could block all his attacks so easily. Don't you only have the combat power of the 6th level of the Law Phase realm? At this time, he finally panicked a little. What's wrong with that? Do you think a dog like you is worthy to be compared with us? You've lived for thousands of years, but you've lived like a dog. Yi Shiwen sneered. You think you're worthy of Yi Shiukong? He has only cultivated for more than 100 years. If he was your age, you wouldn't even be worthy of carrying his shoes. Although Yi Shiwen and Yi Shiukong were opponents in the tournament, the relationship between the two did not deteriorate. There was even some appreciation for each other. Yi Shiwen was the first person to defeat Yi Shiukong, and Yi Shiukong was the only person who could force him to such a point recently. Perhaps for many people, thousands of years was still the most vigorous period of their youth. To be able to cultivate to the 7th level of the Law Phase realm was already extremely talented. Many people who were thousands of years old were only at this level of cultivation. But that did not include Yi Shiwen. Yi Yuhan's face suddenly turned red from Yi Shiwen's words. He had always been proud of himself as a genius and had never paid attention to those young geniuses. He didn't think they were powerful, but he was humiliated by Yi Shiwen today. Don't look down on me. Yi Yuhan finally flew into a rage and blasted his fist again. 10-directional destruction. He used the 10-directional destruction fist to the extreme. This fist technique that had accompanied him in battle and had always been successful finally showed its terrifying power. Even an expert at the 7th heaven of the Transcendence realm would have to temporarily avoid it, allowing him to take the lead. But unfortunately, he encountered Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was not a person who played by common sense at all. This was not only referring to his character, but also his strength. Yi Shiwen sneered, and once again tore the endless golden light. The power of the terrifying 10 directions destruction fist was torn apart by him in an instant, as if it was a piece of cloth. He was not Yishuan's opponent at all. At this time, he finally realized the gap between him and Yishuan. Although he was still in a rage, he was not a fool. He knew that the gap between him and Yishuan was not as small as it seemed on the surface. In the past, he thought that he could easily suppress Yishuan. It was simply a ridiculous idea. "Are you done? It's my turn now!" Yishuan just sneered. He did not use any fancy moves. He didn't even use any fist technique. His pure physical strength directly bloomed with countless golden lights and fell on Yi Yuhan's body. Yishuan's fist was fast and urgent. It instantly tore the vast sky and blasted on Yi Yuhan's body. Yi Yuhan wanted to dodge, but it was too late. There was no time to dodge at all. She was directly hit. Bang! Yi Yuhan's body was like a human-shaped cannonball, directly bouncing out and slamming into the barrier on the side. The barrier directly cracked, and then she rolled down from above. It was only one move, and Yi Yuhan was directly blown up by Yishuan's fist. Chapter 12:27. Countless people around sucked in a breath of cold air, especially those who knew the background of these two people. The result of the fight between the two was just as they had expected. But that was just the result. In everyone's view, the fight between Yishuan and Yi Yuhan itself represented the fight between the old and the new generation of geniuses. Yi Yuhan was not considered outstanding among the geniuses back then, but after all, she had also entered the 7th level of law manifestation realm. Especially in the law enforcement hall, she also had a small reputation, and had made great contributions to the law enforcement hall. Yishuan was a peerless genius who had recently risen to prominence. Even the god's child, Yi Su-kong, had suffered a crushing defeat at his hands. His name had become very famous recently. Even the experts who had been guarding near the law enforcement heavenly prison all year round had heard of his name. Even if everyone was not as optimistic about his future as the Son of God, even if he was not as good as the Son of God, Yi Su-kong, he was still a first-class genius. But that was also the future. It could be said that between the two of them, in the eyes of everyone, Yi Yuhan represented the present, and Yishuan represented the future. Perhaps Yishuan would completely defeat Yi Yuhan in the future, but definitely not now. If there was really a situation where one punch defeated Yishuan, it should be Yi Yuhan who completely defeated Yishuan. That would not be surprising at all. Moreover, according to the information they obtained, Yishuan was at most the combat power of the 6th level of law manifestation realm, while Yi Yuhan had just come out from the law enforcement heavenly prison, and her combat power had just entered the 7th level of law manifestation realm. The two were not at the same level at all, but the real situation of the fight was completely contrary to what they had originally guessed. This Yishuan is really fierce and invincible. Now I finally understand how the so-called invincible God's son could be defeated by his hands. Such a character is simply an evildoer. An ordinary person can't deal with him. Yi Yuhan thought that Yishuan was too young to be bullied, but she kicked an iron plate. She deserves it. This Yishuan is invincible. Yeah, those people from the Golden Jade Pavilion are usually very arrogant. Relying on the support of Prince Jean and Prince Yu, they even dare to look down on us deacons. They are really used to being arrogant and despotic. It's best that Yishuan teaches them a lesson now. Our law enforcement hall is responsible for enforcing the laws of the entire Yi family. The most taboo is to be biased, but now those young geniuses are really getting bolder. They actually dare to extend their tentacles into our law enforcement hall and develop our law enforcement hall people as members of their organizations. It is really intolerable. I don't know what the hall master is thinking. If it were me, I would have completely eliminated these people. Hall Master also has his own difficulties. These geniuses have all kinds of means behind them, and there are many of their supporters at the top level. They are simply fearless. Moreover, our law enforcement hall is an independent existence in the entire Yi family. Those big shots have long been dissatisfied with us, and have long wanted to extend their hands into our law enforcement hall. However, they are afraid of the hall master, so they don't dare to make a move. Therefore, they support these geniuses to develop the elites and geniuses of our law enforcement hall into their people. When that time comes, even if we want to make a move against them, we have to be cautious. In the sky, all kinds of divine thoughts were rapidly intertwined. Many law enforcement hall experts were discussing this matter. Yi Shiwen stood with his hands behind his back, and looked at the elder who had been in a neutral state since the beginning. The elder had been in a neutral state since the beginning. He didn't help Yi Shiwen, nor did he stop Yi Yuhan. He was extremely indifferent, as if he didn't care about anything at all. Well, let's go. He didn't even look at Yi Yuhan. There was only indifference from the beginning to the end. This made Yi Shiwen feel a slight chill in his heart. If he was the one who fell here now, would this elder also stand by and watch with folded arms? He estimated in his heart that this situation was 100% likely to happen. Yi Yuhan fell on the ground and kept moaning. She looked at Yi Shiwen and said intermittently, "Yi Shiwen, our golden jade pavilion will definitely not let you go. Then come. I want to see what other tricks your golden jade pavilion has. I will kill as many scoundrels as you come." Yi Shiwen sneered and didn't care about this dog's barking. Yi Shiwen followed the elder, and arrived at the gate of the law enforcement heavenly prison. 4 powerful figures appeared in the sky at this time. Their auras faintly fused with the heaven and earth. Every move they made had great power. They were all Heaven Realm experts. Heaven Realm experts were highly respected in the ancient Barrens continent. With 4 Heaven Realm experts guarding the law enforcement heavenly prison, other than proving that the Yi clan had many experts, it also proved the importance of the law enforcement heavenly prison to the Yi clan's law enforcement city. Yi Shiwen also discovered that these 4 Heaven Realm experts were only the guards on the surface. Not far away, there were many experts with extremely tyrannical aura, and their divine senses were faintly locked on. These auras were very thin, and ordinary people couldn't discover them at all. However, Yi Shiwen could discover them. Even Heaven Realm experts couldn't escape from his perception. After these 4 Heaven Realm experts confirmed Yi Shiwen's qualifications, they directly pinched the seals, and countless laws converged in the sky. Rumble! In front of Yi Shiwen, a space gate slowly opened. Suddenly, countless resentful spirit aura jumped out and rushed toward him. Yi Shiwen frowned. Such a horrifying degree of resentful spirit aura could drive ordinary people crazy even if they stayed in it for a day. No wonder it was said that the law enforcement heavenly prison was the graveyard of geniuses. These resentful spirit auras were formed by the unwillingness of geniuses and felons who died in it. After countless years and countless people's embellishment, it slowly spread throughout the entire law enforcement heavenly prison. In order to survive inside, one had to be vigilant at all times in order to resist the invasion of the vengeful spirit chi. It was more than 10 times more dangerous than the outside world. Therefore, 1 year of cultivation inside was equivalent to 10 years of cultivation outside. It was not because, like many secret realms, the environment was very superior, and the aura was abundant, even to the point of liquefaction. On the contrary, the environment in the law enforcement heavenly prison was extremely harsh. Even the most basic aura was very scarce. It was difficult to survive inside, which was simply unimaginable outside. You can only practice in the law enforcement heavenly prison for 1 year. You must come out within 1 year. If you exceed the time limit, your contribution points will be deducted. If you exceed the time limit, and don't have enough contribution points to deduct, then someone will naturally go and capture you. Do you understand? Said the elder. Yi Shiwen, remember that you can only practice in the law enforcement heavenly prison for 1 year. Understood. Yi Shiwen nodded. In addition, I want to remind you that in this law enforcement heavenly prison, in addition to the many geniuses of our law enforcement hall as a training ground, there are many vicious felons. Even among them, there are Heaven Realm experts. Even I can't deal with some of them. However, they usually only stay in the most central area of the law enforcement heavenly prison. With your cultivation, it's best not to easily approach that area. Do you understand? The elder reminded. At this time, Yishuwen slightly felt that this elder had some human feelings, and wasn't like a robot a moment ago. However, when he heard that there were actually law manifestation realm prisoners in this law enforcement heavenly prison, Yishuwen couldn't help but be solemn. For the current Yishuwen, the existence of the heaven realm was undoubtedly an unparalleled existence. Not to mention others, even a master at the peak of the law manifestation realm could pose a fatal threat to him. At this time, the elder looked at Yishuwen with a hint of meaning and said, "You have to understand that you treat them as hunting targets, and conversely, you are also their most ideal hunting targets. Because in the law enforcement heavenly prison, the aura is thin and there are few spiritual minds. In order to survive, they will do anything. This place is known as the graveyard of geniuses. For generations, countless geniuses of our Yi clan have been buried here. Most of them were hunted by these vicious felons. I understand, but these are nothing. If these people dare to attack me, then it is really a dead end." Yishuwen didn't care. Unless he encountered a heaven realm master, otherwise, even if his strength was above him, he could easily escape with the demon wings. It was not a problem at all. However, he was not really so arrogant and didn't care. He was very clear that if the situation was really like what this elder said, then the aura would be a very scarce existence. Whether they wanted to cultivate or to survive, they needed a lot of aura. In a situation that couldn't be found in reality, even if he took the risk to kill these geniuses of the Yi Clan Law Enforcement Hall, there was no other way. Although each of these geniuses was overflowing with talent, each of them had their own life-saving needs. They were cruel and merciless, and were not easy to deal with at all. Looking for them might lead to a dead end, but not looking for them would lead to a dead end. Moreover, these criminals would not be ordinary people. If they were really just ordinary people, they would have been eliminated by the law enforcement hall long ago. Only the powerful and vicious people would be imprisoned here to atone for their crimes. It was precisely because of this that neither side was easy to deal with. Therefore, the death rate of Yi Clan's geniuses was so high, and finally formed a graveyard of geniuses. It is good that you have such confidence. Before those geniuses who died went in, they also felt that they were omnipotent like you. They didn't care about anything at all, but in the end, they all died tragically in there. I hope you will not be one of them." The elder glanced at Yishuwen and said, "And I understand." Yishuwen nodded, stepped out, and directly jumped into the gate of the law enforcement heavenly prison. Chapter 12:28. After Yishuwen's figure disappeared, Yiyuhan clutched his stomach that was hit by Yishuwen. He looked at Yishuwen with a resentful look. "Yishuwen, you will regret it. You will definitely regret it," Yiyuhan growled in a low voice. He revealed a somewhat hideous look, like a wounded beast. His eyes looked like he was about to devour someone. "I must kill you. You will die without a burial place for offending our golden jade pavilion." He barely recovered a little. Because he was in the law enforcement city, Yishuwen didn't dare to be too harsh. He was only injured. Otherwise, he wouldn't have survived at all. He sat cross-legged and quickly recovered. He pinched his hand and launched a few communication talismans. Some were sent to the outside of the law enforcement city, and some were sent to the law enforcement heavenly prison. "Yishuwen, I want you to kneel in front of me like a dog." "What evildoer? What heaven's pride? I want you to lose all your pride," Yiyuhan said sinisterly. He had never suffered such a loss since he was young, let alone in the hands of a younger generation. It was simply shameful. And at this time, that elder walked past Yiyuhan's side, and just glanced at her indifferently, as if he hadn't seen anything, but similarly, he also didn't intend to go in and warn Yishuwen. In his opinion, both Yishuwen and Yiyuhan were outstanding disciples of the law enforcement hall. It was best for them to cooperate with each other. Even if they didn't cooperate, they should try not to get involved. This was also the common practice of many neutral elders. These elites of the younger generation, although they were very young, each of them had great means, and they had some unclear relationships with the higher-ups. In any case, as long as they didn't provoke them, it was better to put their own safety before anything else. Moreover, the competition between these young experts was also a kind of competition. Law enforcement heavenly prison. Yi Shiwen's first impression of the law enforcement heavenly prison was desolate. There were few such desolate places in the ancient Barrens continent because the spiritual energy in the ancient Barrens continent was far more abundant than in the true martial domain. Generally speaking, desert-like scenes would only appear when there was a lack of spiritual qi. The more abundant the spiritual qi, the more outstanding the place would be. There were very few places like this in the ancient Barrens continent. Yet he saw such a desolate scene in the law enforcement heavenly prison. Moreover, he could feel that the wind that blew over was dry and bitter. At the same time, it was mixed with a lot of resentment. Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes. How many people must have died in order to fill the entire space with resentment? This astonishing resentment filled the entire sky. Even if one were to stay here for a short period of time, they would be infected and become crazy, cruel, and murderous. The resentment of the dead was equivalent to the aggregation of the most negative energy in the world. It was not something an ordinary person could withstand. Even for these martial artists, surviving in this kind of environment was a huge test of their spirit, especially the mental pressure. This kind of resentment was still tolerable to the physical body, but the mental attack had reached an unbearable level. This kind of mental pressure could easily cause them to have all kinds of fantasies and the like. In the end, they would become insane. The people who lived here were those who had committed the most heinous crimes. Not to mention that they were originally cruel people. Even if they were not originally cruel people, they would still become like this after a long time. As the saying went, birds of a feather flock together. The environment had directly made them like this. It's so desolate. It's not easy to cultivate in such a place. Yi Shiwen squinted his eyes and said, if one wanted to improve one's cultivation quickly, one was to use an extremely superior environment to improve, and the other was to use this kind of harsh environment to hone one's cultivation. The law enforcement heavenly prison was undoubtedly the latter. No one knew when it started, but it had changed from a place to a place for law enforcement hall's disciples to gain experience. Yi Shiwen looked around. The dry river was filled with all kinds of skeletons. Some were human skeletons, but there were also many skeletons of exotic beasts. No one knew how many years had passed. The flesh had long decayed, and only these skeletons were still there. Yi Shiwen took a deep breath. Law enforcement heavenly prison, here I come. His figure directly turned into a streamer, stepping on the light. The ruins of an ancient city passed under Yi Shiwen's body. With his current cultivation, even if he didn't rush with all his strength, he could still travel hundreds of miles in an instant. This law enforcement heavenly prison was a half-bit wall. It was boundless. It was unknown which generation of Yi clan's ancestor had captured it and firmly fixed it on the law enforcement city. Then, it became the place where Yi clan imprisoned criminals. The space of this place had been strengthened many times. Even the most vicious celestial realm villains couldn't escape from here. If one wanted to leave from here, it was only possible when the time was right and they arrived at the location of the gate. In these ruins, there were some hidden dangerous auras. So, Yi Shiwen didn't enter it easily. Before he figured out the relationship between law enforcement heavenly prison, he wouldn't choose to get involved easily. However, Yi Shiwen didn't descend, but it didn't mean that there was no surprise attack. Swoosh! A sharp sound broke through the air. A huge bone arrow broke through the air from the ground in an instant. It was fast and urgent, almost stabbing Yi Shiwen to death. Yi Shiwen moved sideways and escaped the surprise attack of this huge bone arrow. He stretched out his hand, tore out endless golden light, and directly grabbed this huge bone arrow. Bang! Yi Shiwen grabbed this bone arrow in his hand. This bone arrow in Yishuwen's hand had a huge inertia, and it was about to fly into the sky. However, only Yishuwen himself knew how terrifying the power of Tyrant Body was. This bone arrow had a huge power and inertia, but there was no way to escape from his hand. Yishuwen's arm swayed slightly, and this bone arrow was caught in his hand. But even so, Yishuwen was abnormally shocked. Although this bone arrow couldn't escape from his hand, it was only because he had Tyrant Body. If it was a warrior at the 3rd or 4th level of Law Manifestation Realm, there was no way to escape from this bone arrow. He would be killed on the spot, and his heart would be pierced directly. But before he could continue to think, there were suddenly many sounds of breaking through the air below. More than a dozen bone arrows directly blasted towards him with unparalleled momentum. From top to bottom, they completely sealed off the space around him, not giving him any space to escape. Yishuwen didn't intend to dodge again. He directly used the bone arrow in his hand to push away the bone arrows that were coming straight at him. Swoosh! 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 There was a shrill sound of breaking through the air in his ears. The few bone arrows directly streaked past him and continued to fly into the vast space. At this time, Yishuwen finally saw clearly that it was a kind of strange bone beast on the ground. This kind of bone beast had 4 claws on the ground, just like a fierce tiger, but its body was wrapped in thick bones, and on its back, a huge bone spur appeared to be abnormally spitting out. But what was more special was that the bone spur on its back could actually shoot out continuously. Every bone spur could cause violent fluctuations and friction in the sky when it cut through the sky. After it shot out the bone spur, another bone spur grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was the first time Yishuwen saw this kind of bone beast, but obviously, the attack just now was made by this beast. This made Yishuwen a little puzzled because in this law enforcement heavenly prison, there was very little spiritual energy. Forget about those humans, because they came in from the outside, and they had cultivation. However, how did these native mutated beasts grow in the absence of spiritual energy? Compared to the demonic beasts in the ancient Barrens continent that could easily spit out spiritual energy cannons, were proficient in using spells, and were on the verge of becoming demons, the attacking methods of these mutated beasts were very unique. However, this was the only type of mutated beast that Yishuwen had seen so far. Yishuwen was a little curious. This was simply against the law of growth. Of course, not all living creatures needed spiritual energy. For example, the demonic beasts in the demon realm grew by absorbing demonic energy. The blood fiends in the blood realm grew by absorbing blood energy. But no matter what kind of living creature, if they wanted to grow, they must absorb the corresponding energy. This was an unchanging truth. In the absence of spiritual energy, these mutated beasts could actually grow to a level that could threaten the law manifestation realm masters. How could this not surprise him? Just like the humans on Earth in his previous life, they took the route of science and technology because there was no spiritual energy on Earth at all. How did these mutated beasts grow? Yishuwen directly dodged the surprise attack of a few bone arrows, and the blue veins on his hand suddenly bulged. He channeled the chi to his arm, and suddenly shot out the bone arrow in his hand. The target was the tiger-shaped exotic beast. If the tiger-shaped exotic beast was fast and anxious just now, then the bone arrow shot out by Yishuwen had simply traversed through time and space, appearing on the body of the tiger-shaped exotic beast in an instant. The bone arrow instantly broke through the hard bone layer of the tiger-shaped exotic beast's body, directly nailing it to the ground on the spot with great inertia. Roar! The tiger-shaped mutated beast kept roaring, but it couldn't break free at all. In just a short while, it died. Chapter 1229. Boom! 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 A series of loud sounds resounded. Each loud sound represented a strange beast with iron bones attached to its body being directly blown up by Yishuwen. For ordinary people, it was simply impossible to blow up these iron bones. It was very difficult to deal with them, but for Yishuwen, it was a very possible thing. His tyrant body was omnipotent and powerful. It had a terrifying physique that could compete with the dragon clan. No matter how strong these strange beasts were, it was impossible to compete with Yishiwen in this aspect. Every time Yishiwen blew up a strange beast, the flesh and blood on its body would turn into a cloud of mist and be absorbed by him completely. In a short while, this small group of dozens of strange beasts was completely slaughtered. Yishiwen then stopped. He had been in the law enforcement heavenly prison for a full month. The realm of the fourth level of the law manifestation realm had long been consolidated. Now, he was rushing towards the peak of the fourth level of the law manifestation realm. After a month, Yishiwen finally figured out how these strange beasts cultivated without spiritual energy. In this small world, there were all kinds of strange beasts with iron bones all over their bodies. Their strength varied. The strong strange beasts could absorb the essence in the flesh and blood of the weak strange beasts by devouring their strength, so that their strength could continue to improve. Many demon beasts outside also did the same thing, but very few of them would constantly devour the blood essence, because in addition to satisfying their appetite, the energy contained in the blood essence was very little. Not everyone was like Yishiwen, who could use Tianyuan mirror to completely squeeze out the energy from the blood essence. Generally, they swallowed the Niden directly. The Niden was the essence of a demonic beast. More than 90% of the essence was concentrated in the Niden. In addition, generally, they would not choose to devour a lot of flesh and blood, because even absorbing spiritual energy for cultivation was much faster than this. But it was different here. These strange beasts did not have Niden. More than 90% of the body essence was concentrated in the flesh and blood, and it was particularly easy to absorb. In just a short month, Yishiwen had completely stabilized his realm, and then began to attack the peak of the fourth level of the law manifestation realm. He realized that in this place where there was a lack of spirit chi, he had to use all the spirit crystals he had sparingly. In fact, he might even use up most of his spirit chi in one battle. Originally, he was not very worried about this kind of thing, because in any case, with the Phoenix regeneration technique to protect his body, he could quickly restore the lost chi. However, there was no aura here. Just relying on the chi produced by the body itself, the speed would naturally be much slower than usual. Yishiwen had finally figured out the situation of the law enforcement heavenly prison after more than a month. Although it was called a prison, it was almost no different from a small world in Yishiwen's opinion. The people here formed cities of various sizes. Over the years, it was unknown how many people had been imprisoned here. They were all extremely powerful and vicious people. Including the descendants of those who had not died, there were actually quite a lot of people in the Enforcer Heavenly Prison. Yishiwen also met some people along the way. However, without exception, all of them were exceptionally brave and ruthless. Many people simply didn't agree with each other and started to fight. Eventually, they would suffer heavy casualties. However, everyone didn't care about it. They looked as if it was a matter of course. Yishiwen knew that they had been invaded by resentment. They had been corroded for many years, and had become like this. The powerful ones could still maintain their sanity, but the weaker ones had basically turned into lunatics. After killing these strange beasts, Yishiwen collected all the bones of these strange beasts. After Yishiwen returned and collected the bones of these strange beasts, he went to a nearby city. In the entire law enforcement heavenly prison box, there were some felons who hated the Yi family to the extreme, so they would not live with the people of the Yi family. Their city was basically an independent entity. If the people of the Yi family passed by, they would be captured and tortured, and finally become slaves. But there were also some people who were willing to live peacefully with the people of the Yi family. These people formed a city. As long as they were careful and strong enough, even the people of the Yi family could enter. Of course, there were no rules and laws in the entire law enforcement heavenly prison. The only rule that could be regarded as a rule was that the one with the bigger fist was the king. As long as one's strength was tyrannical enough, then there would naturally be no problem. This city couldn't be compared with the Yi family's cities outside. In the Yi family's cities outside, there were all kinds of arrays. If an ordinary person wanted to build it, it would be a dead end. Instead of saying that it was a city, it was better to say that it was a huge war fortress. However, in the law enforcement heavenly prison, that city was really a city. Even the spiritual energy was extremely scarce. It was impossible to have enough spiritual energy to support the activation of those arrays. When Yishuan walked in, he immediately felt that countless malicious gazes were looking at him. It was as if they were looking at a fat sheep. Although the Yi family could also enter the city, it didn't mean that it was very safe here. Living here was not only the ubiquitous resentment that would invade one's mind at any time, but even this chaotic environment itself was a great pressure. Boy, hand over all your wealth. Otherwise, even if you are a member of the Yi clan, there is no way to protect you. When Yishuan entered a remote alley, at this time, a fierce voice came from behind. Unknowingly, there were already dozens of ferocious-looking big men in the surroundings. At this time, all of them were coldly looking at Yishuan, as if they were looking at a fat sheep. Yishuan's face revealed a somewhat sinister smile. He was instantly surrounded, and there were even more people around him who were eager to have a go. These people didn't rush over just because they didn't rush at the first time. Once Yishuan showed any signs of fatigue, they would immediately change from obedient people to thugs. You lowly prisoners, could it be that you're tired of living? How dare you attack a member of the Yi clan? At this time, a cold voice of an expert came from afar. Oh no, it's Yi Qianhe. Let's do it quickly. Otherwise, when he arrives, we will be doomed. Hearing this voice, many people revealed a somewhat frightened expression. These people were obviously very afraid of Yi Qianhe. Perhaps they had been beaten up by him in the past. At this time, someone said fiercely. Everyone nodded. How could they be willing to give up at this time? Most importantly, Yishuan was only a warrior at the fourth heaven of the law manifestation realm. In their opinion, perhaps it would be a matter of a face-to-face encounter, and it would not affect their escape at all. Go, brothers, tear this guy from the Yi clan to pieces! With a roar, the dozens of burly prisoners pounced towards Yishuan. Facing these people, Yishuan did not have the slightest fear, but a somewhat disdainful expression appeared on his face. You are all here to die! Chapter 1230. You're all here to die! Yishuan sneered disdainfully. Swoosh! He suddenly stomped his feet, and his figure instantly turned into a ball of golden light and disappeared. Swoosh! His figure suddenly appeared in front of a sinner. His face was cold, and his eyes were deep. He raised his hand, and a golden light flashed across his neck. Poochie! A flower of blood bloomed from his neck. The sinner's ferocious smile suddenly froze, and his eyes changed from ferocious to incredulity. He couldn't believe that such a situation would happen. Shaochen was just a fourth heaven of the Transcendence Realm warrior. Any random person here was more powerful and awesome than him. Why was it like this? Swoosh! Poochie! Poochie! Swoosh! 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 Every time Yishuan disappeared and reappeared, it would be accompanied by death. He was like a god of death cast in gold. These people finally reacted, but it was obviously a little too late. In the blink of an eye, Yishuan had completely slaughtered more than 20 people, and not even half of them were left. Everyone was stunned, especially those onlookers. At this time, they were a little dumbfounded when they saw this scene. Fast. They could only use fast to describe Yishuan's speed. Those who dared to come to watch were all experts at the 4th or 5th level of the law manifestation realm and above. Each of them was not a small figure in this city. But in front of Yishuan's speed, they were nothing at all. They couldn't even see Yishuan's movements clearly. They could only see Yishuan turning into a ball of golden light, and then in an instant, a person died. Every time the golden light flashed, a person fell. In just a moment, more than 20 people all fell. One should know that these were not pig heads. Each of them was a 4th or 5th level of the Law Manifestation Realm Master, and they were used to doing this kind of thing. Ordinary people were not their opponents at all. Even if it was a newcomer from the Yi family, it would be a dead end if they encountered them. Golden, God of Death. This was the only word left in their minds. Golden God of Death. Golden God of Death. Those people finally realized what kind of monster they had provoked. One by one, they turned around and ran. They fled in all directions, wanting to disappear from Yishuan's sight. Although these people hadn't discussed it, they had a tacit understanding. Everyone fled in the same direction. In this case, Yishuan couldn't kill everyone. At this time, how could he care about others? As the saying goes, it's better for your friends to die than for me. You want to leave? Yishuan flicked out countless golden lights from his fingertips. They streaked across the vast sky, and went straight towards the backs of those people. Poochie! 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 Countless beams of golden light pierced through their bodies, taking away their life force. They fell from the sky and rolled on the ground. Such a ruthless method! He killed all of them! Someone saw this scene, and was scared to death by Yishuan. Although there were many experts from the Yi family who came in the past, those experts were simply flowers in a greenhouse. They were all piled up with countless resources and their own superb talents. In the face of these old and cunning people, sometimes they would even fall in their hands. But Yishuan was different. His methods were so ruthless that it directly scared them. They didn't expect that someone could be so ruthless. Although they usually did things 100 times or even 1,000 times more ruthless than Yishuan, that was when they imposed it on others. They had never felt this kind of fear when it could be imposed on them. Under the domination of this emotion, even if Yishuan was only a little ruthless, they would see it as very ruthless. This Yi family newcomer is very unfamiliar. Is there such a monster in the outside world? They were obviously in the same realm, but they were easily slaughtered by this person. It was as easy as blowing off dust. Now it seems that they are simply a joke. They actually wanted to ambush this newcomer. The Yi family is really blessed by nature. They occupy so many resources, and they have an endless stream of geniuses. Even if we killed many of them, there are still more geniuses growing up. It's really hard to imagine. As long as the geniuses of the Yi family don't die out, we will never be able to stand out. In the future, we will turn into a cup of soil and be buried in this strange world just like our ancestors. The group of villains discussed one after another. Yishuan's complexion didn't change. He didn't care whether these people were dead or alive. He didn't have the slightest bit of pity in his heart. Then, a tyrannical figure directly turned into a streamer of light, and appeared in midair. Yishuan looked and saw a handsome young expert dressed in luxurious clothes. His face was like jade, and he wore a purple-gold crown on his head. Yi Qianhe. Yishuan immediately determined that this person should be the Yi Qianhe they were talking about before. Yi Qianhe's strength was probably at the peak of the 7th level of the Transcendence realm. No wonder these people were so afraid of him. In a small city like this, his strength was enough to suppress all those who didn't want to submit. When Yi Qianhe arrived, he saw that the ground was full of corpses, and the Yi family disciples who were originally besieged were unharmed. He didn't even look at the corpses on the ground. His expression was extremely indifferent. When he saw Yishuan, he smiled and said, "You are of the Yi family's bloodline." He didn't need to distinguish at all because all the prisoners in the law enforcement heavenly prison would have a curse mark left on their bodies. They would never be able to get rid of it. Even if they were far away, he could feel it. Even their descendants would have this curse mark on their bodies. There was no way to get rid of it. And those who didn't have this curse mark were naturally the Yi family disciples. This was very easy to distinguish. Of course, there were many Yi family disciples who were imprisoned because they had committed crimes. They also had a curse mark, so there wouldn't be any accidents. There were too many Yi family disciples, so there was no need to pity them. Yes. Yishuan nodded. You are really amazing. Yi Qianhe nodded with satisfaction and said, "Although these are all trash and not worth mentioning, you are only at the 4th level of the Transcendence realm. To be able to kill them in a few breaths, you are really amazing." "You flatter me," Yishuwen said. "Now there is such a powerful genius outside? This is good. Our Yi family has many geniuses, and our Yi family's development will be better." Yi Qianhe's face revealed a smile. Yishuwen could feel that he was sincerely happy for the Yi family's prosperity. This kind of happiness couldn't be deceived. In the Yi family, there were people like Yi Yuhan, but there were also people like Yi Qianhe who sincerely worked hard for the Yi family's development. "My name is Yi Qianhe, and I am currently the guardian of this city." "What's your name? Are you a new genius? How come I have never heard of your name before?" Yi Qianhe said. "My name is Yishuwen. I used to wander outside, and recently returned to the Yi family to recognize my ancestors." Yishuwen smiled and nodded. "So that's how it is. You have a bloodline that wandered outside. In that case, it must be very difficult for you to cultivate. You actually have such a cultivation. You are really amazing. You should be called a monster," Yi Qianhe said with a smile. "Let's go back to the Yi family station first. Don't pay attention to these people. They are all lowly sinners, and they should never reincarnate. If they dare to do anything to you in the future, just kill them all. Anyway, there are many people like this in the Heavenly Law Enforcement Prison. The family won't blame you. On the contrary, they will reward you with contribution points." Yi Qianhe knew that Yishuwen had just returned from outside, so he explained a bit more for fear that Yishuwen didn't know. When the sinners heard Yi Qianhe's words, their faces showed a bit of hatred, but they didn't dare to say anything. If they really annoyed the Yi family could easily slaughter the Heavenly Law Enforcement Prison. Even if they didn't consider the long-term threat of the Yi family, Yi Qianhe's guardian-level strength was not something they could afford to provoke. "So that's how it is," Yishuwen suddenly realized. He didn't think there was anything wrong with Yi Qianhe's words. These people were all sinners, and their deaths were not to be regretted. He had just come in, and these people had actually dared to do something to him. Chapter 1231. Yishuwen realized that this was the case. Originally, he thought that the Yi clan was in a free-range state in the entire law enforcement heavenly prison. However, it seemed that this was not the case. The Yi clan was not in a free-range state in the law enforcement heavenly prison. However, Yishuwen thought about it. The law enforcement heavenly prison of the Yi clan imprisoned countless felons of the Yi clan. These felons were not only extremely vicious, but most importantly, they were very tyrannical. If these felons gathered together, it would become a huge crisis if there was not enough supervision. For example, if these felons gathered together to form a force, then it might cause a big impact on the Yi clan. This was absolutely not allowed. With these guards stationed in different cities, they would be able to prevent these things from happening to a large extent. They would also be able to understand the movements of these people, so they would not be completely unprepared. The guards of these cities were also the best among the younger generation of the Yi clan, especially the young elites of the law enforcement hall. This was an opportunity that they wanted very much. Not only could they openly practice in the law enforcement heavenly prison, but they could also earn contribution points. Where else could they find such a good opportunity? "I see." Yishuwen nodded and said, "Well, our law enforcement hall is in charge of the laws of our Yi clan. How can we let these vicious felons go?" Yi Qianhe said. "However, brother, you are so young. You have just returned from the outside world, but you have already obtained the opportunity to enter the law enforcement heavenly prison. You must have made a lot of contributions," Yi Qianhe said with a smile. "No, I just won the championship of the competition. Therefore, the hall master specially allowed me to practice in there for a year," Yishuwen said. "The championship of the competition? No wonder. Those who can win the championship of the competition in the past years are geniuses among geniuses. Ordinary people do not have this opportunity," Our law enforcement hall has not produced a genius who has won the championship of the competition for a long time. The hall master is also very angry about this. No wonder even the hall master allowed you to enter the law enforcement heavenly prison, Yi Qianhe said. You are flattering me, Yi Shiwen said humbly. However, he did not say that his opponent in the finals was the Son of God. If he did so, it would be too high profile. Yi Shiwen did not mind being high profile, but he rarely took the initiative to do so. I will need Brother Qianhe to take care of me in the law enforcement heavenly prison. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands and said. Yi Qianhe said. Well said, well said. Brother, I think your strength is not bad, but you still lack some experience. When the time comes, it will be very easy for you to soar into the sky. However, brother, it's better for you not to wander around alone. It's too dangerous. Although you're not weak, if you meet someone who's scheming, you'll be outnumbered. You should know this. These vicious criminals are willing to do anything for the sake of spiritual crystals. Yi Qianhe enthusiastically introduced them to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen could see that Yi Qianhe was truly loyal and devoted to the Yi clan. He might be envious and jealous, but he would be happy as long as the Yi clan could prosper. Well, but I don't really know anyone, so I can only rely on myself most of the time, Yi Shiwen said. You see, I forgot that brother has just returned to the Yi clan, Yi Qianhe said with a smile. They had all grown up in the Yi clan, so many of their friends had already formed for many years. There was no need to filter them out. However, Yi Shiwen was different. Brother, if you're alone, it's best that you don't choose to go too deep. Those places that are too deep are occupied by some lawless and tyrannical people of the heaven tier. Even I don't dare to go too close. In those places, even the elders can't control them too much. They're really vicious people. The two of them had already arrived at the stronghold of the Yi clan's disciples, the Guardian's residence. Compared to the desolate city, the Lingqi in this Guardian's residence was very abundant. Yi Shiwen opened his magic eyes and immediately saw a small spring under the Guardian's residence. It was constantly emitting Lingqi. Then, it was locked by a matrix so that it wouldn't leak out. This ensured that the entire Guardian's residence was full of Lingqi. One could practice inside without drying up. There were not many places like this in the entire city. The Yi clan's disciples could occupy such a place to establish the Guardian's residence. This showed that the Yi clan's influence in the law enforcement heavenly prison was very great. There were no signs of human habitation in the surrounding area. As a result, the confrontation between the Guardian's mansion and the other influences was immediately revealed. It also showed Yi clan's connections in the heavenly law enforcement prison. They were in danger almost all the time. Those extremely daring criminals even dared to ambush the Yi clan's law enforcement hall's disciples. However, it was precisely because of this harsh living environment that the law enforcement hall's disciples had made rapid progress in the law enforcement heavenly prison. People needed pressure to make rapid progress. This is my Guardian's residence. Many of our Yi clan's disciples live here. There are not many places in the city with Lingqi, Yi Qianhe introduced. He didn't seem to regard Yi Shiwen as an outsider. He became even more enthusiastic after learning that Yi Shiwen had won the championship on behalf of the law enforcement hall. He wasn't fawning over him. He was happy from the bottom of his heart. This is rare. It's very rare to see such a scene in such a desolate place in the law enforcement heavenly prison, Yi Shiwen said. Yes, but this is nothing. In fact, in the central area of the law enforcement heavenly prison, the celestial realm experts among the criminals used a great method to forcibly capture the spiritual veins. Then, they locked them inside. This made the density of the Lingqi there almost no less than the outside. However, it also made other places more desolate. Otherwise, the law enforcement heavenly prison wouldn't be so desolate. Yi Qianhe explained. Yi Shiwen nodded. So that's how it was. The Lingqi in the law enforcement heavenly prison was very scarce. The spiritual veins were even rarer. The only remaining ones had been seized by the big shots or the Yi clan. It was simply not their turn to occupy them. Therefore, for the sake of survival, and for the sake of snatching Lingqi, battles might break out. If it were in the outside world, no one would pick up the Lingqi if it fell on the ground. Apart from this, the only way to improve cultivation was to devour the flesh and blood of those strange beasts. The flesh and blood of these strange beasts were particularly easy to absorb. Although the progress of cultivation was very obvious, it was better than stagnating. Of course, this was not an obstacle for the disciples of the Yi clan, because these people often brought a large number of Lingqi before they came in. Moreover, because of the time limit, they could not stay in the law enforcement heavenly prison for a long time, so there was no shortage of Lingqi. This also gave the criminals another way to obtain Lingqi, which was to ambush the disciples of the Yi clan. Even if they killed one, they could become rich overnight. Just as Yi Shiwen was about to step into the guardian mansion, a series of hurried footsteps came from inside. A young man jumped out. This person's cultivation was actually around the fourth heaven of the Transcendence realm. The aura on his body was sharp and heavy, far more powerful than the average fourth heaven of the Transcendence realm experts outside. He was simply invincible among the fourth heaven of the Transcendence realm. Of course, the premise was that he didn't encounter a monster like Yi Shiwen. Senior brother Qianhe. The young man saw Yi Qianhe and quickly said, "What's wrong?" Yi Qianhe asked. "Phone you, he." The young man's eyes turned red, and his voice was a little choked. "What the hell happened?" Yi Qianhe quickly asked. "Phone you is dead, and his head has been sent back," the young man said with red eyes. "Damn you, Yi Xiao!" Yi Qianhe was enraged. His anger seemed to be able to burn through the sky. He was furious. Yi Xiao also sent a message that if we send someone to follow him next time, we should also send someone who is passable. Sending a piece of trash is underestimating him, the young man said with a choked voice. Obviously, he had a good relationship with Yi Fengyu. "Damn it!" Yi Qianhe shouted angrily. His 5 fingers clenched into a fist and suddenly punched to the side. The whole area of the air collapsed with a loud bang. The scene was extremely terrifying. "Brother Qianhe, what the hell is going on?" Yi Shiwen asked. "Phew!" Yi Qianhe took a deep breath and slightly calmed down. Then, he said, "Yi Xiao was originally a disciple of the Yi clan, but he committed a serious crime outside. The elders of the Yi clan didn't sentence him to death, but just locked him up in the heavenly law enforcement prison. Who would have thought that this guy would become even more unscrupulous after being locked up in the heavenly law enforcement prison? He actually went around killing disciples of the Yi clan. I received news that he had fled to our territory, so I sent someone to investigate. Who would have thought that he would actually kill them? Bastard!" The more Yi Qianhe said, the angrier he became. These disciples of the Yi clan had been isolated in the heavenly law enforcement prison, so they were even more united in this aspect. Many of them had formed a life-or-death friendship with each other. Now that he had seen Yi Fengyu killed, his anger suddenly burned. Yi Shiwen nodded and said, "Then he really deserves to die. His death is not to be regretted." These people really deserved to die. All of them were extremely daring. "Call everyone. I will personally take action. Today, I must catch this bastard with my own hands. Such a person doesn't deserve to live in this world. I will kill him one slash at a time," Yi Qianhe said angrily. The anger in his eyes almost materialized. He had been completely infuriated by Yi Xiao's behavior. Yi Qianhe looked at Yi Shiwen and said, "Brother, this Yi Xiao is cunning and vicious. I don't know if you can lend me a hand." "Of course." Chapter 1232. Yi Shiwen soon got to know some of Yi Xiao's situation. Yi Xiao was originally an outstanding genius of the Yi clan. However, it was unknown what kind of crime he had committed. So, he had been imprisoned in the law enforcement heavenly prison. However, Yi Xiao didn't restrain himself after coming in. On the contrary, he went around killing geniuses of the Yi clan because only they had enough spirit crystals. Those who were originally in the heavenly law enforcement prison didn't have any spirit crystals. They were of no use to him at all. It was pointless to kill more of them. He had only been here for a dozen years, but many of the geniuses of the Yi clan had fallen at his hands. His cultivation base had also been constantly exploding in the midst of this slaughter. Now, he had even fled to the vicinity. Yi Qianhe originally planned to send someone to stop him first. Then, he would wait for an opportunity to capture and kill him. Yi Xiao was only sentenced to be imprisoned in the heavenly law enforcement prison. However, he had slaughtered the disciples of the Yi clan. This was a capital crime. Anyone could choose to capture him and kill him. However, Yi Qianhe didn't expect that the person he sent would be discovered and killed by him. Now Yi Xiao had robbed him of all his belongings and sent his head back. This was a provocation. A blatant provocation to Yi Qianhe. Yi Shiwen slightly raised the corner of his mouth. This Yi Xiao was very interesting. He dared to provoke an outstanding genius of the Yi clan like Yi Qianhe in this place. Although he didn't dare to rush into the city, it didn't make any difference to Yi Qianhe. It just so happened that he wanted to exterminate this evil guy. He could also get contribution points from the clan. So why not? I will personally kill him when the time comes. You guys help me, Yi Qianhe said to everyone after everyone had arrived. Yes. Everyone nodded. They clearly knew of Yi Xiao's brutality. In terms of strength, Yi Fengyu was already considered very powerful among them. Basically, other than the guardian Yi Qianhe, there were not many people who could firmly suppress him. There were only 2 or 3 of them. Even he died tragically in the end, and even his head was sent back. It could be seen that Yi Xiao's strength was tyrannical. Most importantly, his methods were cruel, and he was unscrupulous. Well, then let's go. Yi Qianhe nodded. After we catch and kill this beast, we will all have a lot of clan contribution points, which will allow us to cultivate here for a longer period of time. Yi Qianhe did not say anything else after he finished speaking. He led the group of Yi clan disciples out of the city. The collective movement of the Yi family disciples quickly attracted the attention of all the major forces in the city. As the nominal ruler of this city, the Yi family's deterrence was still very great. Every move of the Yi family was a wind vane for them. Why did the Yi clan run out with such great fanfare? I just received news that the traitor of the Yi family, Yi Xiao, has appeared here. That Yi Fengyu was ordered to monitor him, but in the end, he even lost his life. I heard that it angered Yi Qianhe. Ever since Yi Qianhe took charge of this city, it can be said that he has used thunderous methods. Many people with bad intentions have fallen into his hands. This is great, he is going to fight with that Yi Xiao. I heard that Yi Xiao is not someone who is easy to deal with. Otherwise, he would not be able to make so many names in a row. This is a dog-eat-dog fight within the Yi family. There is no need to pay attention to it. Many people didn't care about what the Yi clan was doing. Although the Yi clan ruled the heavenly law enforcement prison with iron and blood, in fact, they didn't care about everything. As long as it didn't involve the Yi clan, they wouldn't easily intervene. If someone hunted the Yi clan's disciples, then they would suffer the full retaliation of the Yi clan. On the contrary, if they just killed each other, then no one would care about them. In the eyes of the Yi clan, it was natural for the Yi clan disciples to hunt them down. For some people, it was not necessary to hunt down the Yi clan disciples to obtain spirit crystals and spirit stones. They could choose to hunt down those who killed the Yi clan disciples. In this way, they could obtain spirit crystals and would not be retaliated by the Yi clan. However, there were also some people who hated the Yi clan. After seeing the Yi clan's large forces moving out, their eyes flashed with the light of conspiracy, as if they were planning something. Yi Shiwen followed Yi Qianhe and the others all the way out of the city. They rushed towards the place where Yi Fengyu had died tragically. They had a special way to confirm where Yi Fengyu had died, and then continued to look for other clues to determine Yi Xiao's location. Originally, many people had some doubts about why Yi Qianhe wanted to bring Yi Shiwen along. In the entire heavenly law enforcement prison, a mere fourth sky of the law manifestation realm might just be able to protect themselves, and they were lucky enough not to encounter two powerful experts. There was no use in bringing him along. He might even become a huge burden at a critical moment. But then they discovered that although Yi Shiwen's realm wasn't high, his speed was actually very fast. No matter how much they accelerated, Yi Shiwen could easily keep up with them. At this time, they felt much more comfortable. They would also choose to respect people with great strength. At this time, Yi Qianhe said, "Now you know how powerful Yi Shiwen is. Don't underestimate his realm. Although he is only at the fourth level of the Transcendence realm, he is the champion of the competition in the outside world. He represented the Law Enforcement Hall and won the championship. Even the Hall Master thinks highly of him. Do you understand now?" Everyone was slightly stunned. They hadn't expected that Yi Shiwen's background would turn out to be so extraordinary. They had been staying in the Yi clan's law enforcement heavenly prison all year round. However, they weren't completely ignorant of the outside world. In fact, they were very clear about the competition of the Yi clan's ancestral worship ceremony. They had also participated in such competitions in the past. And they had also obtained some rankings. Therefore, they were very clear about the importance of such competitions. Especially to be able to become the champion, this was a person with a boundless future that they did not dare to imagine. If Yi Qianhe had said this before, then perhaps they would have thought that the value of the Yi clan's ancestral worship ceremony had been reduced to this extent. A warrior at the fourth sky of the law manifestation realm could actually become the champion. This difference was too great. But just now, Yi Shiwen had displayed his extraordinary speed. Although he did not show anything else, it was enough to let them all understand that Yi Shiwen was not simple. He had not displayed all his strength, but it was clearly far from the fourth sky of the law manifestation realm. Otherwise, he would not have been able to become the champion. They did not know that among the competitors this time, there was actually a legendary figure like the Son of God. Otherwise, they would have been shocked. They did not speak along the way. Soon, they arrived at the place outside the city where Yi Fengyu was killed. There was still blood there. Yi Fengyu's headless body had been eaten by the local exotic beasts. Not even the bones were left. Only some scraps were left, which allowed people to distinguish that there had been a corpse here. "Damn it!" Yi Qianhe said angrily with tears in his eyes. "Yi Shao, you damned beast. Even if I have to chase you to the ends of the earth, I will tear you to pieces." "Ha ha, Yi Qianhe, there is no need for you to chase me to the ends of the earth. I will give you the chance now." At this time, an insolent laughter came from the void. Then, a terrifying giant palm slammed down from the void, wanting to slap more than a dozen people to death. Boom! Everyone moved out of the way. That large hand left behind an enormous crater on the ground. It was so deep that the bottom couldn't be seen. Its power was terrifying beyond imagination. "Who is it?" Yi Qianhe shouted. A pair of tiger eyes swept around as if to see through the void. At this moment, a silhouette appeared in the air. It was a young man dressed in a black robe. His face was pale to the point that he looked sickly. His eyes were grayish-black and he looked extremely strange. At this moment, he looked at the crowd with an evil gaze. It was extremely strange. "Yi Shao." Yi Qianhe revealed the identity of this person. Yi Qianhe, speaking of which, I should call you senior," Yi Shao said with a smile. "Unfortunately, you have come to kill me. You disappoint me. Don't you know what you have done? Everyone has the right to punish you," Yi Qianhe said with a straight face. "Now you have the nerve to call yourself my junior. I don't know why those people didn't sentence you to death. But you have fallen into my hands today. So, only death awaits you." Yi Shiwen looked around. This Yi Shao actually dared to stay at the scene of the crime. His courage was not ordinary. No wonder Yi Qianhe had described this guy as extremely daring. He must have done something earth-shattering in the past. You are very courageous, Yi Qianhe said coldly. You knew that we would track you, but you still dared to wait here. You are courting death. Of course, how can I not be courageous? Ha 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 ha! Yi Xiao laughed strangely. Yi Qianhe, I thought you were a smart person and shouldn't be like this, but it seems like I overestimated you. You're just an idiot. What does it matter to you how many idiots die? They're just incompetent and lowly, wasting the family's resources for nothing. If I had them, I would have soared into the sky long ago, becoming a dragon or a phoenix. At the end of the day, the family is just too rotten. There are too many incompetent people taking up too many resources. Just like you, you're also an idiot. Do I really not have the slightest confidence in staying here? You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.